Councilmember Qureshi.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Schutz.
Here.
Thank you. Looking at our agenda this evening, we need to move the work sessions around and do our check-in on affordable housing initiatives before we discuss the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center, because we have some guests here who are coming from Annapolis, and so we're going to move that a bit earlier for folks so they can get home to Annapolis. Looking forward on our agenda items coming up. Next week, the City Council will not meet because it's Thanksgiving week. And then our last meeting before we take our December break will be on Wednesday, December 7th. Our works... I just skipped November 30th, didn't I? Thank you. I'm really looking forward to December. Thank you for that. We do have a meeting Wednesday, November 30th. We will have a closed session that will start at 6 p.m. on matters related to collective bargaining negotiations. And then we have a voting session on our resolution for our City Council winter recess. We have 2 work sessions that evening, the status report on the council priorities and a discussion of the Green Team priorities. And then on December 7th, we have a discussion of the Tacoma Junction redevelopment and a voting session on a possible vote related to Section 4 of the development agreement. And then the City Council will be in recess for the rest of December. All right. So now we will take public comments on voting items. We have one voting item this evening. It is the second reading ordinance amending our code related to parking meter zones. Do we have any public comments on that? No? All right. Then we will take public comments on general matters. If you'd like to come up to the microphone. We don't have our regular system of keeping track of time, so I will just start my phone and let you know when 3 minutes are up. So. Okay. Fine. Just please state your name and where you live.
So I'm Ashley Flory, and I live at 7116 Willow Avenue. We call it Upper Willow, and that's actually quite germane to why we're here. My house faces what I think of as still think of as the Mark's Kitchen parking lot. My neighbor Jenny, back here, my neighbor to the south also faces the parking lot, and my neighbor Edwin lives adjacent to that parking lot. And we're having a lot of problems. I'm going to focus on the ones. I'm going to just focus on a couple, and each of us will raise some additional problems. So my block of Willow has changed a great deal in the last 9 years. When I bought my house, there was only Mark's Kitchen, no Olive Lounge, no Republic, no Ace Hardware, no Kinda. So it was quiet. After 9 o'clock, reliably, it was quiet. Any day of the week, I could leave my windows open and not hear obscenities. I liked that. And that's not true anymore. And in fact, it hasn't been true even in the daytime, but at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's especially jarring. So we're coming to ask for attention to these issues, both in a zoning sense, in an enforcement sense, in a process sense, and actually we're just looking for, I think, some fairness. We're carrying the burden of those wonderful establishments. I love Ace Hardware. I love Olive Lounge. I love Republic. I'm happy to have them there. And I would like to be able to leave my windows open. And on that, and the other thing so that's noise, and we'll get into some more of that. But the lighting is also a real problem for me. The Bank of America and the owners of the Mark's Kitchen lot, in order, I think, in their minds, to keep their parking lot safe, I think have made it less safe because their lights shine on my house, which means if you're walking down the street towards the bank, or if you're walking across from my porch, to the Olive Lounge, there is a huge light shining right in your face, so you have to look down. So it's bad environmentally.
30 seconds.
Okay. So two things. Change the lights, and also things change, and we need a process to address everyone who lives next door to a commercial area. We need a process to resolve these issues every time they come up, not just me and my neighbors, although our situation is pretty bad. Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Edwin Cruz. I live at 7117 Willow Avenue. I'm here to discuss about my property. My family's property is right next to the dumpster, the law area where the dumpster's at, behind the Olive Lounge and Mark's Kitchen and whatnot. And the proximity of that dumpster has now moved about 17 feet away from my house. We're now going to be able to smell all the nasty smells, see all of the trash piled up as it's been for the last few days, which is an issue for us because we want it to be clean. We've always strived to make sure our neighborhood has been very clean. We've maintained our property as much as possible to make sure it's clean. And now with that dumpster being relocated literally right next to our house, I have pictures here that the council would like to see to demonstrate exactly how close it is to our property. To my property specifically, as our family. The cleanliness issue has been a problem for years. When the old dumpster existed in the corner of the back of the lot, they would dump their trash on the floor, disregarding that there were bins. The recycling bottles as well, some would fall on the floor, not in the bins as well. The noise from the bins at night is just unbearable sometimes, especially on the weekend time. There is a rodent issue as well. That's just another issue I would like to address. There are a lot of rats in that area because of the previous uncleanliness of that dumpster in the surrounding area. Now, that fear has moved closer to our home, and it's a big problem for us. We've tried to do as much as we can on our end to maintain no rats on our property, but the uncleanliness of the trash, of all of the businesses in that area, it's a problem for us now because it's moved closer to us. Noise has been always an issue, and it persists up until, every weekend up until 2, 3, 4 in the morning. There's people playing loud music in the parking lot, bottles being thrown all around, and so it's a big problem. People yelling, fighting, screaming. Some of it has to do with the alcohol consumption within some of the restaurants late at night, and we understand that, we're not against progress for businesses, but when it endangers us and, hinders us to rest and sleep, because many of us have to wake up very early in the morning, it's a problem for us in our neighborhood. Also, I would like to deal with parking. We're constantly suffering from that problem. Just in the past
30
5
seconds.
days, 30 seconds. Just in the last 5 days, we've had 2 cars block our driveway completely. I have pictures to demonstrate to the council as well. So you can see that this is a persisting issue that we've had for years. In the summertime, it gets bad. I don't like to call it cops just to waste time, but when you block our driveway, it's a problem for us to get in and out of our houses. We pay property taxes here, and we expect to be able to enter our premises with no problem. I'm going to pass it on now to somebody else on my neighborhood, on my block.
Thank you very much. Great, and you can give those to the city clerk, and she'll make sure we get them. And I would just also say, as you remarked about calling the police, our recommendation is you call the police for noise and if someone is blocking your driveway, because that way we have a record of it. It's very important. And we can discuss this more, not here tonight, but I know Councilmember Kovar will follow up with you, and you could follow up with the city manager. But it's very important you're not disturbing the police. That's their job. Yep. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jennifer. Does this sound good?
Yeah. Perfect.
Forgive me, I'm just going to read because I didn't want to squander my 3 minutes. I think it's 3 minutes. My name's Jennifer. My sister and I own the house closest to Bank of America, directly across from the Curchero parking lot. I second my neighbor's comments about early morning and late night noise, crashing bottles in the dumpsters when the restaurants close, garbage, and rats. But I would like to talk about aesthetics. Our families look out every day over an ocean of concrete. In the Curchero lot, there is no nice lighting, streetscaping, or hardscaping, although they've just updated the alley and it looks better. There's no landscaping other than some dinky little 30-year-old shrubs, which I'm grateful for, but it looks old, it's tired, and it's dirty. I look out my windows towards Laurel, and I see an inner-city slum. This area of Tacoma, from the metro to the farm market, is highly traveled by pedestrians, commuters, and visitors to our community, and it's a mess, not just for me and my neighbors, but all residents and visitors who walk here to go to the bank machine, the farm market, the street fairs, the shops, the church, the metro. It's not attractive for potential new residents looking to buy here. You don't look at our area and think, wow, this is a wonderful historic area. We're 1 block from Laurel. We are the historic downtown. When I go to downtown Bethesda, I see beautiful lighting and hardscaping and landscaping with thoughtfully planned transitional links between commercial and residential areas. Transitional links are fundamental in urban planning, and we don't have them. This area, which is so central to downtown historic Tacoma Park, is an afterthought, and that is what it looks like. We've been asking for trees down the Bank of America parking lot median for years. We want them there, and we'd like that or similar in the Curchero parking lot median to improve the view for residents who look at it from the other angle, visitors and restaurant patrons. They'll also help baffle the noise that will be coming from the 2 new outdoor restaurant patios, especially on warm evenings when the patios are full and we have our windows open. Crepe myrtles get nice and big. They bloom for 6 months of the year. They have a bared trunk to provide sightlines for anyone concerned about crime, and they can stand up to the extreme heat of asphalt lots. Could we at least try to make that happen? That would make a huge difference in how this area looks, at least in the summer. Why can't the city plan and budget to make this area a beautiful downtown space? The view is terrible for our real estate value, and it can't be good for business, because who wants to sit at a patio in a crummy old parking lot to have dinner?
30 seconds.
We are asking that city planners please come over, stand on my front porch, see what I see or what Edwin sees. Take a good look at the backside of these buildings that we look at, and then please put some thoughtful planning into this and try to find some incentives for the developers and property owners to create more attractive transitional links between commercial and residential. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
My name is Lorraine Pearsall. I'm Vice President of Historic Tacoma, and I was contacted by several of the Willow Avenue neighbors. You have heard their testimony tonight. Historic Tacoma cares about all our neighborhoods, whether they're in the historic district or not, and neighborhoods that are adjacent to commercial areas are particularly at risk, and I think a lot of attention needs to be paid to them. I went over there, and there were many, many issues. I'm going to focus on the dumpsters. I was shocked to see a dumpster moved really close to a resident, right under their bedroom window practically, without any consultation whatsoever. And the pad was put in and the dumpster was moved, and as you look into the dumpster, you can see overflowing trash. It's not covered. I mean, obviously rats can get in. I was really quite surprised at that. Looking across the street at the Bank of America lot, there's a dumpster there with trash all strewn out all over the street because the capacity of the dumpster isn't big enough to hold the trash, or they're not having it picked up often enough. And so, you know, when you think about these things and all of the other issues, and I know there have been other issues in other parts of town, I think it's time for us to consider a way the city can help in this. I think there's a way to regulate some of these nuisance things that are also very much health things. So you are focusing on noise, and I appreciate that you're doing that, but I think that's not enough. I mean, vermin is a really big issue. And many of these other issues as well, the lighting, all of that. And so I know you are going to be thinking about this. I want to say that I'd like to work with you in coming up with a solution because we really care about this, but I do think it's important, and it's not going to go away. It's only going to get worse. So I implore you, you know, if people say, the city has the ability to issue fines if someone's grass isn't cut long enough. I think that the city needs to look at some ways it can also help neighborhoods with
30 seconds.
these trash issues, et cetera, et cetera. So thanks very much. This is a city function. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Wayne Sherwood. I live at 218 Grant Avenue behind the Maple Avenue Community Center. And a sentence or two, I just want to thank the City of Tacoma Park and the mayor and the other people in the City Council and the police chief for the comments that have been made about the city's not job to enforce the federal immigration laws. There are people across the country who are terrified about that, and I am very pleased to see Tacoma Park taking the lead. I would like to make a few comments about one agenda item on the recreation center that's on your agenda tonight. I'm glad that you're meeting here. I'm glad that's coming up. I'm a little concerned about some of the emphasis in the paper that was distributed. As you know, there was a meeting here on October the 5th that was held by the Friends of the Recreation Center, and they had about 30 people came, and they met in a little room down the hall, chaired by Priscilla Labovitz. And we had people from this neighborhood came out, and they testified, and I took sort of extensive notes on what was said. I don't know whether those comments and those remarks had any effect on the city or not. I didn't see any of that written up in the city's newsletter, except to say that there was such a meeting, and they praised the committee. Well, I praised the committee as well. But there was nothing in there that said what was said at that meeting. And what was said was a lot of people from the community came out and said they think this is a great place. It could be a wonderful community center and a recreation center, and it should be expanded, and a variety of different kinds of programming could go on here, and there could be a lot of additional things for the kids, like quiet study rooms or rooms for counseling or rooms for a wellness clinic for youth and families, or a whole a computer center. Over and over, people were saying things like the community center down on Maple Ave. They should have more of those kinds of things, and make it. We talked about the youth success, and you had a wonderful program down at the community center. And they said, what we need is more kinds of activities for youth success, where the youth come in the same place and in the same building, the staff of whoever is running the facility has a chance to get to know
30 seconds.
The kids and talk to them about other things that are going on, how they can connect up to educational things, and a whole bunch of other things. And it just sounded, I was on the planning committee for the community center on Maple Avenue for like 6 or 7 years. And we questioned what it was going to be and what it was going to turn out. And you see what it's like now. It's just a wonderful place for the whole community. So when you're thinking about the future here, I would implore you to think in those same kind of terms for this place here. What a wonderful place this could be for the whole community. And this focuses on economic development. That might not be the best use.
Thank you, Mr. Sherwood.
Hello. My name is Doris Duarte. I live at 7401 New Hampshire Avenue. We have over at the apartments over 250 kids that need a place to go after school and on the weekend. And they look at this building, even though this is the gym, as a place for them to go after school. Due to the location of the condo and the rental property, we do not have room for commercial due to the traffic. Traffic is a problem on Saturday and Sunday due to the car wash. We would like this building to be converted to a recreational center, up-to-date recreational center that will provide programs for the kids. And if you wanted mixed use, we would really appreciate low-income housing. We really would like, the residents at Hampshire Tower would like to thank the City Council and the mayor and the deputy mayor for thinking about us, because the kids over here at this end of Hampshire Towers do not have transportation to go to Maple Avenue. They do not have the team room where they can have fun. They do not have the activities that are being done at Maple Avenue. So I just want to tell you on behalf of the residents and the parents, thank you, and the kids, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Cruz, and I live in 7117 Willow Avenue. And I'm also here to discuss the uncomfort that we've had to experience with this recent move of the trash can. Apart from the rodents, apart from the bad lighting, the crime that has increased around our area just because of all these issues, I would like to bring you to your attention the smell that has gotten really unbearable these last few days, especially because of the move of that trash can closer to my home. And it has become a terrible issue because, you know, I get that the restaurants need a place to throw away their trash and everything, but it's just piles of trash, and it covers our view. And it also creates an issue when it comes to the increase in crime around that area, because as if it wasn't bad enough that we have people arguing out there, the police is coming around constantly, we're getting all these, moments where we're scared as well because of, the poor lighting that's in that area. With that trash can moving closer to our home, it now gives, in sort of a way, an area, safe haven, if you will, for the people that want to commit violent acts around that area, who want to hide and so forth. So I'm here to talk about the smell, the rodent issue, the lighting, and also that, we could be put in harm's way just because of all those things that have been done, even without our consent, without our knowledge. It just happened one day. So I would really like to ask you all to please help us in whichever way you can, and as the city, find ways or solutions to avoid all these things that are affecting not only myself, but my neighbors and the rest of the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sam Abibi. I'm with Solo Investment Group, and we are a small business development company, and we were interested in purchasing 126 and 128 Lee Avenue, which they came on the market, and it was an open process, and several people submitted offers, but our offer got accepted, and we put it under contract. And we were working with the city, with Sarah Dane's office, and with architects, with a lot of plans to renovate the 12-unit buildings. They were vacant for many, many years, and the court actually ordered the previous owners to either develop it or sell it to someone else to renovate it. And the city didn't want to see the buildings to stay vacant, so they decided to sell. And after we got under contract, the county of Maryland offered to purchase it. They have a right of refusal, and they want to purchase it, and we don't know for what reason they're going to use it for. And as a small business, we are going to be quicker to renovate the properties than the government, and I believe having market value rental properties is better for the neighborhood and for the city, and we have neighbors support to do that. And I also want to say, like, Tacoma Park doesn't have a good reputation for being a very good landlord friendly because of rent controls and other things. So a lot of investors and landlords shy away from coming and investing in Tacoma Park. And when you add having the government to come and say we want it, and they were not involved even in the open market to show interest or to submit an offer, and it feels like they're trying to exercise their right, which doesn't sound fair to
30 seconds.
And it seems like they can pick and choose which properties, which multifamily units they can go after, or which small business they can go after. So it seems like not fair, and the council has to approve this sale, and we want to voice our concern. And I feel like these units would be better for the community if we have
Thank you,
them
sir.
as a market rate.
Thank you. And just to let my colleagues on the council know is that this is one of the issues that we're going to be updated on by Ms. Daines in a little bit. So any other public comments this evening?
I gather that this is the time to make any public comment, including on things that are later on the agenda.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
Just as I'm Priscilla Labovitz, I live at 7303 Birch Avenue, and I am part of the Friends of the Tacoma Park Rec Center. And I am fine with, and I don't speak on behalf of the Friends, I am fine with soliciting expressions of interest by developers or anybody else. I just don't think that looking at this is any substitute for dealing with the rec center as it is. Because whatever decisions the city makes, this is a process that's going to take years and a great deal of money. And I don't mean to discourage people from pursuing it, but we would like to see action and to improve the center. I looked at the figures that are attached to the agenda, and one of them makes it sound like it costs $20,000 a year to run this place, and the other one makes it sound like several $100,000. And at some point, I'm sure that will be made clear so we understand what is at stake. But I would like the city to take a greater interest, show an interest in including a financial one, but also a planning one in what we can do to improve the center for all these kids now. Not just kids, I'm sorry, but for the community as a whole. And this overall, the macro discussion has nothing to do with what our community wants to have here now. So let's keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Machui.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Jane Machui, Parents of Special Needs Adults. It's an organization of self-help, and also we're trying to get the city and the state and the county to acknowledge our presence and to help us some. I don't like to beg, but I'll beg for my son who's autistic. And there are several people in our organization so far, and we'd like to reach out to people because we don't have anybody on this side of New Hampshire Avenue yet. And we'd like to, it's sad if you have an adult with special needs, but if you do have one, try to make the best of it and join our organization. If you would dare to, I can give you a card if anyone who wants to approach me after I talk. I can give you my card. And recently we were accepted a CDBG grant to help a wonderful exercise class that comes on Wednesday night. Unfortunately, it's not here. It's in the other building for you all. But please, reach out to us if you would like to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Clarice, and I live on the complex 636 Houston Avenue. I lived there over a year ago now. When we moved to the place, we found out there was a lot of problem with the place, and then we really feel like we're not safe, and the place is not clean, and there's a whole lot of issue they're not taking care of in the building. And I started to address the issue to the guy that do the engineering, taking care of the things that need to be fixed in the place. He apparently wasn't addressing the issue to the landlord, but in the other hand, I know that the place has been like heard from people like a mess for many, many years. And there's no security, the door is not secure, they don't clean the house, the common area of people crossing by, get to the places. The elevator is always dirty, even you can find pee, anything in there. They don't regularly clean it. And I also think that some people live in the building that are also messing up the place, but the landlord is not taking any action to help people that want to stay there. You know, moving is not easy. So once you find yourself in a place, you have to make sure you won't get yourself in somewhere else, to become like the same you came from. So the city tried to help us to form a tenant association. People were not collaborating, and I don't know if the city has a power to go after the landlord to take care of those issues, to make sure we are safe, kids are safe, and also it's a good place for people to live. They smoke anywhere. Even last night, I couldn't breathe in my living room. People smoke anyway. So I can't even let my child step out from my apartment to go outside by herself. She's 10, but, I feel like we're not secure. Can the city help without having the tenant association?
Thank you. And we can, if you need to leave early tonight, please leave your name and we'll follow up with you after this. Thank you. Any other public comments this evening? No, that's it. All right. We have one proclamation for the record tonight. Small Business Saturday is on November 26th. The City of Tacoma Park recognizes the importance of small businesses as the glue that holds the community together. According to the census, there are approximately 2,574 small businesses in Tacoma Park. I thought that was a pretty high number. Nationwide, small businesses created more than 2/3 of new jobs over the past 2 decades. And advocacy groups and public and private organizations across the country have endorsed the Saturday after Thanksgiving as Small Business Saturday. And so we have this proclamation hereby proclaiming November 26, 2016, a Small Business Saturday in Tacoma Park. All right, now moving on, we'll have council comments. I don't have my light thing tonight, so you just have to raise your hands. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's nice to be in this location for the meeting. I missed the previous meeting that took place here, and it's refreshing to not be sort of up above looking down on everybody. We're sort of at the same level here, which is good. And I think it's positive that folks from other parts of town did come over here, so I appreciate seeing some of the crowd who lives over near me for being here. Just a couple of quick things I wanted to mention. One, I did attend an event tonight, and the mayor was there for it as well, sponsored by the Montgomery County Collaboration Council, and several people were awarded for what was called time well spent, meaning that these are good people that's worth supporting. One of them was Senator-elect Chris Van Hollen, but also Crittenden Services of Greater Washington, which delivers, I'm just reading from this, life-changing programs for teen girls in Montgomery County, also in D.C. I'm on the board of it, and that's why I happened to be there. And it's a really great program, and the event tonight was great. And if you got there early enough, which the mayor didn't, you also got to see the mayor in a little movie. So that was a great event earlier today. I did want to talk about what the neighbors from Willow Avenue had to say about the work that's taking place in the parking lot where Olive Lounge is located, the lot that's kind of behind Mars Kitchen and some of the other businesses in that part of Old Town. And I think the neighbors addressed a number of the different issues that relate to noise and garbage and potentially animals and lighting and so on. This isn't just a sort of gripe fest with the council. I met with a small group of neighbors recently this week with a representative from the family that owns the Middle East restaurant and the Olive Lounge, and I thought the individual was very, Mr. Hishma was very supportive and pledged to try to work with the neighbors. Some of the issues relate, though, to issues beyond his control relating to the landlord and the management company, and I've reached out to both of them as well. And I did hear back today, just a short time before this meeting from the management company, and they have agreed to meet over at the site to look at it. I think the big thing is going to be the location of the dumpster, right where it is now just doesn't work for situation. We have to try to find another location for it. And I think some of the issues relating to noise may need to be addressed through our new noise control ordinance, but I also think that it can be worked out in a way that will preserve the positive and nice way of life that we have there, but it's going to require some work. And the one thing I would ask, and maybe we can get an answer from this later, is whether we have the ability at the municipal level to adopt ordinances that would put in place some restrictions on people putting trash at commercial dumpsters but not really putting it into the dumpster and not closing it up. Because one of the things that we heard, and I think the people from the Olive Lounge, since they're right there, generally do a good job of this, but they mentioned that some of the other tenants have just tossed the stuff down there or flipped it over, and sometimes people rent out some of the spaces there for other rent them out to other groups who may not know what the requirements are. But I think if there were a way to say it's against our local law to do some of those things, then maybe that could be enforced. We might make at least some progress on that. So it would be helpful, I think, to be able to explore that. So I would appreciate that. And I think...
you good?
I'm going to say one other thing. I'd like to suggest, just on the sanctuary issue that I believe Mr. Sherwood mentioned and other people have talked about, that we should consider before we depart for the year, passing a resolution making it clear that we're going to retain that status and join with others who want to do that. And I realize it might be premature for us to just bring that up now, but since we won't come back until the second week or so of January, and by then Congress may have already started meeting, will have already started meeting, I just feel like to get it out there, we might want to have that done before we leave on December 7th. So I'll see what my colleagues have to say about that later. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you. Do I have to push a button on here?
No, I don't think so. Just lean in.
I would, first of all, just like to thank the mayor for scheduling this meeting over here this evening. I think it's great that we're having meetings in different locations in the city. I really appreciate everyone showing up here and making this so successful by coming to this location. I also want to thank Mr. Clark for the improvements we've seen here at this rec center. I know everybody focuses on the fact there's a lot that needs to be done and maybe replace this center, but comparing this, the aesthetics of this place now compared to what it was a couple of years ago, I think Mr. Clark has done a great job in upgrading this facility, and I thank him for that. I just wanted to mention, follow up on Mr. Kovar's comments on the sanctuary city. I think it is something that we need to be prepared for because it does look like the U.S. Congress may be taking steps to discourage communities from being sanctuary cities. And I think one of the things that will be helpful as we consider that is how much money the city receives from the federal government and a breakdown of that so that we understand what the impact would be if they do cut off funding to communities that are sanctuary cities. Thank you.
Councilmember Schutz.
Well, good evening and welcome to my ward. Ward 6 rocks, in case you don't know that, okay? And we have the only rec center in the city, so if you want to use it, you got to come to Ward 6. I'm going to reserve my response to the comments we've heard this evening about or questions until we get to the work session on that. But if some of you have to leave before we get that far, just know that you're being listened to. We're going to be very careful about how we go forth with this planning process. I'd like to associate myself with Mr. Kovar's remarks in regard to the comments we've heard tonight from our residents on Willow Avenue. We've got similar problems we associated with New Hampshire Avenue and the interface between that busy street and the residential areas, and there are solutions to these things. We've toughened up the noise ordinance this past year so that it's much more effective, and the police can be a lot more effective. So as Mayor Stewart just said a minute ago, do not hesitate to call the police with regard to noise. They have authority to do things that will be helpful. But I understand that you would rather not have to call the police at all. And our property maintenance code allows our city code enforcement inspectors to address the things like rats and overflowing garbage and things like that. So there is hope in that direction as well. So I believe we have the capacity as a city to be responsive, but first we have to learn as much as we can by listening again, and talking to the individuals who are concerned. And we're really suffering the consequences, if you want to think of it that way, of our success in attracting strong, popular businesses to the Old Town area. And now we have a responsibility to figure out exactly how we can continue to enjoy those businesses' success and the popularity of that part of our city, and maintain and preserve the sanity of our residents and the quietness and stuff like that. I'm confident we can certainly help a lot in that area, and I look forward to being a part of that solution. I think that's all I want to say.
Thank you. Any other council comments? Good. All right. I just have a couple of announcements. First, I also want to say thank you to everyone who is here this evening for the meeting, and particularly thank the city staff for arranging this. It's nice when we can move our meetings around, but it does add to their workload, and it's a bit of a challenge, and I appreciate them stepping up to that challenge. I just want to recognize and remind folks that we did meet with the Tree Commission in a joint session on Monday evening, and there will be minutes from that meeting. I think it was a very productive meeting, thinking about what is working and what things we can improve on our tree ordinance, and then just overall the maintenance of the tree canopy in the city. And so there will be more on that in coming months. Last Thursday, I testified in front of the Board of Education regarding their capital improvement budget, and I just wanted to reiterate and let you know that I discussed with them the importance of making sure they paid attention to us in this part of the county, and to thank them for the fact that they're on the list is Tacoma Park Middle School and Piney Branch, and the Piney Branch feasibility study is starting. Let's see, another thing coming up is on, and I forgot to mention this when I did the future agenda items. On December 6th, that is a Tuesday, we will be having our state delegation here with us in Tacoma Park. So the folks who represent us in Annapolis are coming to Tacoma Park, and this is an opportunity for us to tell them specifically what our needs are here in Tacoma Park. We will post the agenda over the next couple of days. There will be time for public comment that evening, so if folks have particular things they want to raise with our state delegation, this is a good opportunity to do that. So we'll have public comments, and then also comments by the City Council and a dialogue with our state delegation. And that is on December 6th, and it will be in the council chambers on Maple Avenue. The other thing I just want to say is a thank you to the organizers of the event that was held in the community on Friday evening. Seth Grimes, Jen Wofford, and Nadine Block pulled together a gathering for members of our community to show solidarity to those groups who, during this past election cycle, were basically targeted by the rhetoric that was used during the campaign, and we just wanted to reestablish and reaffirm our values here in Tacoma Park. And so I think it was a successful evening, and thank them again for organizing that. And I just want to, I know our city manager has more information about our sanctuary city designation, and I would agree with Councilmember Kovar that we could possibly look at a resolution for our December 7th meeting, and that makes sense. And so I'll turn it over now to the city manager.
Thank you. Follow up on two items from last council meeting on our lobbying strategic plan. Those are coming very shortly. So there was a question raised if you'd get to see them soon, and they're on their way. The city is also preparing a letter to the Montgomery County Board of Elections to convey concerns about the issues experienced at this facility on Election Day. Doris Duarte was so wonderful to direct traffic. I gave her kudos last week for her assistance, but it should not take that. And so we do want to make sure that either this facility or a different facility that is accommodating to voters is available. This evening, our Deputy City Manager, Jason Damweber, is testifying on behalf of the Council to the joint priorities hearing of the full Montgomery County delegation, and his testimony has been distributed. As the Mayor mentioned, we'll have a Tacoma Park-specific meeting related to District 20 on December 6th. And we will have an opportunity for people to speak, but this is going to be one of those opportunities where we're going to ask for people to sign up to testify. So keep your eyes open for that. Related to Tacoma Park as a sanctuary city, there was some questions about how much federal funding could be in jeopardy if the Congress wants to say that federal funds don't go to sanctuary cities. I will say, first of all, that the definitions of sanctuary cities and which federal funds are huge question marks. So we don't know exactly what kind of impacts there might be. We do receive about $90,000 a year in community development block grant funds. We sometimes get some federal funds for some police department, bulletproof vests and those kinds of things, some small grants. We do get some fairly significant grant funds that come through the state government or other entities. And for example, we have about $2 million in grant funds for work on Flower Avenue and Ethan Allen Avenue. In many readings, those are a little far afield from some, and they've already been authorized for us, so they may not be in jeopardy. But even if they're not in jeopardy in the future, we may not be eligible for them. So it is something that, with a small budget that we have, we appreciate that this could be fairly significant. The other side, I think, of being a sanctuary city is that by being a sanctuary city, our police department is much more effective in solving crimes and in meeting public safety needs because people are comfortable working with our police department. We encourage that. And so there's a monetary value to that I don't know what it is, but it is also a very important value in terms of our public safety. Completely different note, leaf collection begins this Friday. There's very specific collection on Flower Avenue and Piney Branch Road. The next week it starts our several weeks of leaf collection, and for those who get to rake the leaves, you know all about that, but there's more information on the website if you want details. A fairly significant topic that has been on the council's agenda for some time has to do with Tacoma Junction development. And I'd like to encourage people to look on our website on the Tacoma Junction webpage for information that have status updates. They hadn't been posted until recently, so they are there. There's a lot of information about the Tacoma Junction project that's underway. The development agreement that the city has with Neighborhood Development Company requires a letter of intent between the Neighborhood Development Company and the Tacoma Park Silver Spring Co-op to be submitted to the city on or before, to be agreed to and submitted to the city before November 29th. In light of this deadline, the council is scheduled to receive an update on the process at the December 7th meeting. Depending on where negotiations stand and whether a letter of intent is submitted, the council may need to take action at the meeting on December 7th and determine whether to offer a 30-day extension of the deadline or to require Neighborhood Development Company to seek another anchor tenant. And I think one of the things that we've want people to know is lots of work has been done. The council is very concerned that this be a successful project. And so please pay attention to the information on these status updates. The three options that the council will have to consider on December 7th are: 1, to grant a 30-day extension to the deadline for submission of a letter of intent; 2, to require Neighborhood Development Company to begin seeking a new anchor tenant; or 3, to terminate the development agreement and pay Neighborhood Development Corporation Company up to $75,000 for out-of-pocket expenses. And if the council decides to grant the 30-day extension, it would be 30 days from December 7th. So just, we're getting to those crunch times. We're trying to be as open as possible, especially given the holidays coming up, so we urge your attention. And finally, I wanted to give kudos to one of our IT staff, Z, who managed to save someone's computer that really needed to be saved, and we appreciate it very much. That's it. I can answer any questions.
Thank you. So we'll move on now to our voting session. We have one voting item tonight, a second reading ordinance amending the code related to parking meter zones. I don't think we had any changes from the first reading.
That's correct.
Before I ask for it to be moved, does anybody have any clarifying questions? No? All right. Would someone like to move this?
So moved.
Councilmember Mail, second.
Second.
Councilmember Qureshi. Any discussion or questions? No? It's a second reading ordinance. Do you need to? Yes. Go ahead.
Councilmember Mail?
Yes.
Councilmember Kovar?
Yes.
Councilmember Qureshi?
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens?
Aye.
Councilmember Smith? Councilmember Schutz?
Aye.
Mayor Stewart?
Yes. All right. Now, as I announced at the beginning of our meeting, because we have some visitors here with us tonight, we are going to shift the work sessions and first do our check-in on affordable housing initiatives. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Daines, right? Yep.
As many of you are aware of, the City Council has identified as a priority for the future the creation of...
Let's see. Yeah, we can't hear you. You're not on.
Bien. Are you getting her volume up?
This little thing here, it's not a button.
It's not a button.
Talk some more.
I have to talk. I'm going to. Oh, wow. Then I can really hear myself even. Many of you are aware of the fact that the City Council has established as a priority for its upcoming budget and programming the creation of safe, stable, sustainable housing that's available for individuals with all incomes. And we've been asked this evening to provide a check-in on what progress has been made to accomplish that goal. So if you're looking at the cover memo, we've identified 5 particular subjects that we're just going to touch on briefly this evening that are designed to address that goal and to answer questions that have been raised by the City Council. The first on the list is a tenant opportunity to purchase, which Mr. Abibi addressed briefly in his comments during the public comment session. The City of Tacoma Park's code in Chapter 6, which is focused solely on housing, addresses a variety of laws that impact housing, from the licensing of rental facilities to the registration of owner-occupied group homes to rent stabilization. It also includes within that code provision for the tenant opportunity to purchase. So if you are a tenant living in an apartment building or even a single-family house, and the owner of that building elects to sell the property, they have to offer it to the residents first before they put it on the open market, And in the event that they are unable to or not interested in acquiring it, they can enter into a third-party contract with an outsider, and at that point in time, the city or the county can step in and exercise what they call right of first refusal. So basically, if I'm a property owner, I've negotiated a sale of my rental facility with a third party, the city or the county could decide to step in and acquire that property at those same terms and conditions. This has happened at two facilities that are in Ward 4, 126 and 128 Lee Avenue, both of which are currently condemned, one of which has been vacant for many, many years, and are a total of 12 units, if I recall correctly. The county has expressed an interest in acquiring those properties for purposes of providing affordable housing to a very focused population, and we've invited representatives from the county, Mr. Kenneth Winston, who's a senior planning specialist with Montgomery County Department of Housing and Community Affairs, and Ms. Deborah Fotatis, did I get that right? The director of Coalition Homes for Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless. So what I'd like is to have them come and give a brief presentation, if you will, in terms of what their plans are for those two particular properties and why the county is interested in exercising its option for right of first refusal. So if you guys want to come up to the microphone.
Good evening. I'd like to say it's a great opportunity to be here. As Ms. Daines indicated, I'm Ken Vinston with the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. Been asked to come and speak on DHCA's intent or reasoning behind our desire to purchase the two properties that are in question, 126, 128 Lee Avenue. If, as you may know, the county has the right of first refusal law, and under that law, any owner has the opportunity or the obligation, I should say, to give notice to the county of their intent to sell the property. We received that notice from the owner or the owner's representative, a realtor working with Long and Foster in regards to that owner's intent to sell the property. In getting that notification, we examine, as with all ROFA, right of first refusal applications or notifications, we look at the application and we look at the property to try to determine if there is an intent or a reason for which the county should try to exercise its right of first refusal to buy the property. The county normally exercises that right in regards to buying such properties for the intent of trying to preserve and create and maintain affordable housing units. When looking at this property, the fact that it's been vacant for quite some time, it's 12 units, and it is also, because of those conditions, it is very reasonably priced. We felt that it's a very unique opportunity for the county to utilize its powers under the right of first refusal to acquire that property. And our intent is to acquire it, to work with a nonprofit organization, Coalition Homes, to return it back to the housing stock, to have both affordable and special needs housing. We think it's an opportunity to give mixed income housing to the area, an opportunity to remove property that's been vacant for quite some time, eliminate slums and blight. And because of the acquisition price and its condition, we very rarely get the opportunity to buy properties at this particular price level, particularly in Tacoma Park and throughout the county. So that is the main intent in regards to why we're interested in buying 126 and 128 Lee Avenue. We are working and decided to work with Coalition Homes. We have worked with them before in regards to working with not only right of first refusal properties or acquisitions, but other properties throughout the county. They have a very good track record and capability and experience in both managing and developing properties, and also working with the specific clientele that we will intend to house at their property. We don't intend for all 12 units to be homeless or special needs population. We worked out or decided to try and structure a mixture of both special needs units and units that can be affordable persons between 60 and 80% of AMI. And also we would like to try to provide 25% of 3 of the units that can be at market rate, so that we'll try to have a mixture of special needs, affordable, and market rate, so that you will get a mixture of income and cash flow for the property. We've expressed our interest to the owner in regards to our intent to buy the property under the ROFA laws. However, we also indicated that we'd be subject to the action and decision of the City Council of Tacoma Park in reference to your decision in reference to whether you have an interest in purchasing it under the the law you mentioned.
Tenant opportunity to purchase.
Tenant opportunity to purchase. I can also let Ms. Fotitis address any specific concerns in reference to the property. We will be providing both acquisition and rehabilitation funding to Coalition Homes to redevelop the property. That is the normal structure that we do when we work with nonprofits in reference to buying properties under the ROFA laws. And we try to structure it so that we provide enough financing, long-term financing, so that the property can be viable. Once it's rehabilitated, the property value will increase. It will return units back to the housing market. As I said, we think it will provide a good mixture of mixed income for Tacoma Park and for the county overall.
Do you want to ask questions now or wait till?
I had a question for his president. I think you identified kind of 3 different classes of apartments you would end up with: affordable units, special needs units, and then market rate units.
Yes.
I guess one question is, what are the special needs units as far as pricing on that? Is that going to be at an affordable price, or are they going to be at market rate?
I'll let Ms. Fotitis address that.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Debbie Fotiadis, but close.
Sorry.
No problem. I am the director of Coalition Homes, and before I introduce what we do, I will specifically answer your question. So we assess the rents at the Montgomery County and or Tacoma Park. It depends on where the stabilization might be at the same level. So those are those market rents, those for affordable and those for the special needs population are the same. The difference is how we pay that delta between what it is that the tenant pays and what it is that we're charging. So our special needs population is at a 30% AMI. We will be getting subsidies from 4 or 5 different programs. One that we're particularly excited about, which is a new program called Keys First, which is centered on women and children, those who have experienced domestic violence, those who could get a head start. We have other programs, our PPH program, which brings also specific to families in this particular genre, that they would pay 30% of whatever income they may or may not have, and but the total rent stays about the same. We tend to, we have 110 properties throughout Montgomery County. They range from single-family homes for independent families to our largest is a 32-building apartment complex in downtown Bethesda, where we have 32 PLQ units for previously homeless seniors, individuals, men and women. In this particular, in Tacoma Park, we have 2 other 6-unit multifamily, one which has been in operation for 7 or 8 years, and one which is going to start construction in another month or so, and 2 4-unit where we specialize for those generally with women with young children. In fact, that's pretty much who we have at those 4 units, one on Lockney and one in University. So Coalition Homes is an affiliate of Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless. Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless, it is the provider of those support services. So it provides support services to those who have the most need and are the most vulnerable, and it provides services to those who need very little, that are almost self-sustaining. They just need a little extra to keep them on a trajectory. Coalition Homes is their independent affiliate, and we are a development, acquisition, and property management company. That's my background. We have a team of 4 along with vendors. We have probably one of the most committed, I would say the most committed, property management company that actually specializes in this population. So we bring in, and I'll give you a perfect example. We own units on Lockney Avenue and University Avenue. It is a tough stretch of town in the area. There's a lot of issues. Our population is very vulnerable, so they're often prime for those who perhaps would not mean well by them. And in that circumstance, we now have an agreement with the Tacoma Park security team, which is made out of, actually they are Tacoma Park Police. We now have them coming to support all of our properties. We have quarterly tenant meetings to actually kind of get the police and the community and the tenants to start working together rather than apart. And we are putting in extensive facility renovation dollars throughout those, including fencing and other things to kind of limit, improve the stewardship, self-ownership, and limit what exterior and external folks can do. So we're very proud of what we're doing. We have a $100,000 facility plan on our 6 units that we own in Tacoma Park, and that's outside of any of these major construction programs.
Sounds like a very interesting model. What's a little confusing to me is what happens if you don't find the funding from year to year to subsidize those tenants? So, in other words, what guarantee do you have that they're going to keep that subsidy?
It's a great question. Some of our, so we get funding, different funding and different project-based vouchers from HUD, from the state, DHCD, from HOC, from HHS, from the HIP program, and this now new Keys First. We have about 7 or 8 different funding sources. Some of those vouchers last for 5 years, some for 10. Our HUD program, as an example, is fairly sustainable. Most of those contracts have been renewed. If they are not renewed, we actually have a built-in in our budget, so we are a zero-based budget. All of our money either gets plugged back into our facilities and/or capital reserve and/or rental reserve. So you can well imagine if we lose subsidy and/or some of our tenants have some difficulties, we're actually able to substitute their voucher rent with our own cash flow, and/or we can keep it vacant for a while as we work through that. So it has not been a program.
Yeah, it's just a little concerning with the changing political climate that we're in.
You and everyone else, yes. We're pretty fortunate, actually, much more than most. Our funding is locked down, at least for the next 3 years, in the majority of our programs. We have pretty good cash flow coming from our 4 and 6 unit establishments, and we actually can support that for a 6-month period of time without those subsidies. What's even more exciting, though, for this particular, so we practice the housing first model. For anyone who's familiar, you can't, no one can take care of their own problems until you get them a roof over their heads first. The best model, though, is to integrate those individuals together with others within the community. This idea, we're still negotiating. I think that this area is not at a fair market. I think this area is at an 80%, and I have had to displace tenants in this area, and their rent is generally about 15% lower than what it is you could get elsewhere. So I'll either convince them to bring it down a little, or I'll bring my rents down a little. But in this case, with these 12 units, where our intention actually is to not have any one group in any particular building. So for every 6 units, you have a couple who are starting out, basically in need with their special needs. You would have others who might very well be fair market. You would have other affordable. And I'm trying very hard to target some of our tenants. We've been in this business, owned and operated these properties now since 2008, many of them. And we have tenants who started off with significant subsidized housing who are now actually paying 30% more in rent than what the housing requires. That's the condition if you pay 30%. It's time for them to move on, time for them to move out and let someone else take advantage of those really strong subsidies. And this would give them that opportunity to be a fair market and or affordable, a little bit of a safety net since we're still the property managers and we're still available. So it is not a concern that we have been worried about.
These buildings are in my ward, and I look forward to you being
I'm sorry.
I say these buildings are in my ward, and I look forward to your joining the community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the council? So, Ms. Daines, do you want to make sure the council understands?
Right. So the City Council, there are two levels to this. The City Council has an option to exercise its right of first refusal, and instead of the county stepping in and acquiring the property under the same terms and conditions as Mr. Abibi has negotiated with the property owner. Conversely, you can elect not to exercise your right of first refusal, at which point the county would step in because before they can exercise their right of first refusal, they need the approval of the City of Tacoma Park.
Can I just clarify, do they need the approval of the City of Tacoma Park, or do they need us not to act on our first right of refusal?
I believe it says approval.
Does it? Okay.
Is that right?
And just...
Historically, you have not acted.
Mm-hmm.
And just to be clear, that the council will the council have to take an action to relieve these two buildings from rent stabilization?
We have chatted about that when I met with the representative from the Coalition of Homes. It is under the current agreements that they have regarding the occupancy and the rents that are being charged or that would be charged at the properties, it is unlikely that they would get a blanket exemption from rent stabilization for both buildings. If they're using the Section 8 voucher program, for example, individual units could become exempt, but again, those are based on the tenants in those units pay 30% of their income for rent. It is highly probable that if this transaction were to take place, that they would approach the City Council about having a pilot, a payment in lieu of property taxes. The Coalition for Homes has 2 pilots right now, I believe, for properties that were acquired several years ago that remain in place right now.
So that's maybe we'll know later.
Maybe we'll know later, yeah.
At the microphone, please.
Sorry.
I could say we absolutely will be asking for and could ask tonight, since your other things for the pilot for the property tax exemption, that's significant in terms of the cash flow for our population. Mm-hmm. In terms of the stabilization rent, I wasn't able to meet with Jean Kerr to actually know what made the most sense. I'm most concerned about positive cash flow, so that I can keep them in good shape and be a good steward. If we can do that under the stabilization, we're perfectly happy to do so. I just don't know what those numbers are because I haven't met with her yet. Okay. Just to clarify for the council's information. To do a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes, it's a 2-reading ordinance. So based on past experience, it would typically take over a period of 3 meetings before that would become effective. And there's a formal request process.
And what's the timing of these decisions that we have to make?
As far as this, if the city were to exercise its right of first refusal to go step in and acquire the property, you have 45 days from the date that we were notified of the pending contract. We received formal notification of that on November 2nd, so you'd be mid-December.
My inclination is to let the county go ahead with the process, but I'm concerned that we don't know what they're going to be asking for in return at this point, so it's kind of hard to make a decision.
And Ms. Daines, I think the amount of money that would be pertinent to also for the council to know. Since
right. If I recall correctly, the 2 properties are being purchased for $350,000 each per building. And then there's a significant amount of renovation required in both properties given their current condition. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. $2.4 million for those who cannot hear.
Okay, so $2.4 million for the acquisition and development of that. Okay.
So we will need to bring this back to the council.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Good. All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming out tonight to answer our questions. It was very helpful to hear from both of you. And thank you already for the work that you're doing in the community. So, yeah. Great. Thank you so much.
Also included in the topics for this evening was a response to recommendations that have been submitted by CHEER on behalf of the Renters Protection Group regarding the city's rent stabilization ordinance. Included in the agenda packet were some listing of requested code amendments that we received a week or so ago. I believe it's been modified since then, but this may not address all of the issues that were included in the material we received yesterday. As you'll note, a number of the recommendations are fairly administrative in nature and could be easily done. Others have an impact in terms of staff capacity and costs associated with them. One of the biggest things that is being advocated is that, unlike the current situation, requests for exemption from rent stabilization would be approved by the City Council. It's important to note that there are 3 different kinds of rent stabilization exemptions that are allowed by law. One is new construction. The other are individual units that are receiving assistance based on the income of the tenant, and the tenant pays a certain percentage of their rent towards, or their income towards rent. That's typically the housing choice voucher program. And then there's also those properties that in their entirety are exempted from rent because of a regulatory agreement they've entered into with a governmental entity. That could be a project-based Section 8 program agreement. It could be financing through the HOME program, which is a federally funded program. It could also be funded through a program, low-income housing tax credits, et cetera. What I've included, just to give you some information in terms of what the level of activity that's involved or associated with both of those, is in kind of in the middle of the packet after the responses to the questions submitted by CHEER, is a list of those properties that are exempt in their entirety from rent stabilization based on an agreement that they've entered into with the governmental entity. You'll note that a majority of them were completed or submitted and approved soon after the code was enacted. So in the last 3 years, for example, we've only had 1 request for a building that would be exempt from rent stabilization. That was recently over at Hillwood Manor. The opposite is true of those individual units, and we've received requests ranging from 13 that we've gotten so far this year up to 35 that we received, 36, excuse me, several years ago. So it kind of ranges about 22 individual units and individual requests for exemption from rent stabilization. Right now, when we go through and do it administratively, we look at the agreement that they've entered into. We make sure that it has an impact on a sufficient number of units that are contained within the rental facility, and what the terms and conditions are in terms of who can live there based on their income and what the rents are going to be, again, based on the agreement that the property owners entered into. With rare exception, basically Hampshire Towers, majority of the agreements are from the state of Maryland or through the federal HUD. The exception for Hampshire Towers was an agreement that was what they call a rental agreement that the county issues for properties that are being sold as part of their first right of refusal law. So there's that to take into consideration regarding the suggestion that the code be changed so that we no longer approve exemptions from requests from exemption for rent stabilization administratively. There's also a recommendation that landlords who've been granted an exemption must file an annual rent report for the rental units. Frankly, we do that now. Properties that are individually exempt from rent stabilization based on a housing choice voucher, they include that information in the annual rent report that they submit to the city that includes all the other units within that facility. We also receive copies of the compliance reports that the property owners receive to ensure that they are adhering to all the terms and conditions of the regulatory agreement that they've entered into. So we receive those reports now. A third recommendation is that more specific information be given to the tenants regarding what the rents are going to be charged. We can give some of that information, but the Renters Protection Group is suggesting that we include future rent amounts up to at least 3 years. And based on how those rent levels typically are calculated, it's not possible. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development issues generally every 12 months, sometimes every 8 months, 18 months, an updated listing of what incomes are considered at various percentages of the area median income and how that translates into maximum rents that may be charged or assessed to households that fall within those income parameters. So it's just very difficult. One thing I've noticed over the years is that the maximum or the rents that are based on a percentage of the AMI, because incomes in this particular area have been basically pretty flat for the last couple of years, the rents have not gone up dramatically. I think there was even a year where it went down a couple of dollars. So we would be unable to do that, though we could provide some additional information in terms of where the rent information or rent levels come from. They have also requested that we go through and, if I'm reading what the recommendations were, more specifically monitor the rent reports that are submitted, which would be basically looking at the income verification and the rents that are being charged for 1,500 units. We do not have the staff capacity to do that and are relying instead on the monitoring of the agency that entered into the agreement with the property owner in the first place. We will, however, if someone submits a complaint that the rents are being increased inappropriately or that are higher than what they understood them to be, we will investigate that on a case-by-case basis and expand the investigation to the entire building as when appropriate. The other and final policy change that has been suggested is that the county or the city be more proactive in terms of enforcing code violations that are at least 90 days old. Unfortunately, I do not have any information on this as far as how many properties would fall into that category at this point in time. It's been requested for the county, but we haven't received it as yet. One thing that I should note is that it would have an impact. To do this would have an impact on the contract that we currently have with Montgomery County, who does their inspections. So if, for example, we were to, as recommended here, is to issue citations on a daily basis until the code violations are corrected, we would physically have to go out and send an inspector to go out and look at that particular property every day, because we can't just issue blanket citations without verifying that the information is correct. We don't have the staff to do that in-house, and my assumption is that if we were to change the contract with Montgomery County, that would result in a corresponding price increase or fee increase. So I've probably missed something, but we've attempted to address each of the recommendations that were made or that were submitted in the materials that are attached to your cover memo.
Great. I think for terms of organizing the council conversation, why don't we take each one at a time and go through it. So the first one is the exemptions from rent stabilization. And I just had a quick clarifying question. On the three categories you discussed, and apologies if you said this, if it's on the individual unit that gets out of it because it's receiving the type of voucher program, if the person, does that stay with the unit, or if the individual then moves out of that unit?
Those stay with the individual and are generally for just 12 months, so they will have to go through and renew them every year. And so what we do is they reapply every year for the exemption for that individual unit that's occupied by that specific tenant, and it's based on a contract that has been issued by the Housing Opportunities Commission, which provides the rent subsidy for that tenant in that particular bill or unit at that time.
Thank you. Councilmember Kovar, did you want to start us?
Oh, yeah, just a couple of questions. Thank you, Ms. Daines, for the information. I think that the version, I think there was a few additional changes made by chair that didn't get into this version, but I don't think we have to unduly worry about that. But for example, in the first part, they were talking about 90 days as opposed to 180 days for the notice, and there were a few others. It was not entirely clear to me where you have the staff note in response to the first one. It says there are 13 individual rental units exempted, an average of 20 requests for an exemption on an annual basis. Is that of the individual units?
Correct.
Okay. And how many are there where it's on average, if you can say, for a larger, where it would apply to numerous units?
We've had one in the last 3 years.
Okay, and that was the Hampshire?
Hillwood Manor on New Hampshire Avenue. The exemptions that are approved based on a regulatory agreement, a loan agreement, tax credit agreement, are lengthy. And you can, as you can tell, hopefully from the spreadsheet, some of them are 20 years long or 40 years long, where they have to maintain that affordability for that level or that length of time.
So we haven't had problems with those, right? Or have we, where they've not been able to maintain their affordability on those long-term contracts?
No.
Okay. Okay. So I think one of the questions or one of the comments I heard previously was that maybe it wasn't a good idea for us to get involved in approving some of these things, but it sounds like if it's a fairly limited number, that wouldn't be a huge burden.
It's a fairly limited number, and it's fairly straightforward review criteria. You have an agreement or you don't. The agreement addresses the number of units that it applies to, and that number either matches what's required in the code or not, and it has to include specific language in terms of the incomes of the people that occupy those units and how much they can be charged for rent.
I guess I would say, considering that it's relatively infrequent, I wouldn't have a problem myself with the idea that we might have to sign off on those, but that's my view.
Any other on the exemptions from rent stabilization comments? Yeah, Councilmember Mail.
Yeah, thank you. For the exemptions associated with 620-030A2, the large building exemptions, I would support either a council decision as part of the process, or at minimum a council and public notification step in the process. I guess I'm less concerned about the individual, single apartment rental exemptions, although I still think some sort of notification would be valuable there. And then the tenants receive notification, and it's part of their whole contract basis. Yeah, no, just to be clear, I was educating public. Public, okay. And then, go ahead. One thing you might want to think about that is if we were to do that, it's like the person, the individual living at 123 Jones Street in Unit A qualifies for the Section 8 program and is getting an exemption. So it's a factor to take into consideration in terms of what information is shared. And I think across the country, jurisdictions vary in how much public information they make available about rental rates for individual apartments, and so it might be helpful to be informed by what other jurisdictions do in terms of the trade-offs between having that information be available to the public and privacy concerns. But my sense is there's some variation across the country in how that information is treated, and there's a trade-off there. Associated with the reporting under 2?
No, we're not doing that.
Okay.
So we're going to do one at a time.
Okay, I thought it was still
section
stabilization exemptions, but that's fair.
No, that's right, this one?
Yep.
Yeah, no, I was going to do, each chunk so that we all had a chance, or whoever wanted to comment on it. So is there anything else under number 1, the exemption from rent stabilization? I think I would join.
Could I just ask a question on this? Mm-hmm. For these kinds of exemptions, is there often a timeliness basis about when that decision has to be made? Because I know that we've had issues when we've been working, with it has a pilot and there's certain dates so that they can get their financing, but I didn't know if that was normally the case or not.
For the newer ones, for the larger buildings, the more recent ones, yes, timing has been an issue because it has an impact on their financing package for the balance of the property, be the acquisition or the renovation. So,
right.
Yes. For the smaller individual units, if we had to include a notification period before it was approved, that would also have an impact because just the nature of human beings, you tend to do these things at the very last minute, so we will often get an application that's a day or two before the current exemption expires because of the process required to get the contract through HLC. Sometimes that happens very fast, sometimes it doesn't. So I'm more concerned about that one as far as the immediate impact on the individual. With the larger buildings, it could be something you just have to factor in when you're going through and pulling your project together.
Thanks. And I was just going to say that I agree with Councilmember Kovar and Councilmember Mail that I would be interested in us further exploring for the larger buildings, having that come before council. But I agree on especially on the individual units, given the volume and the necessity. I don't see that needs to come before council. And I would like to just second what Councilmember Mail asked and maybe do some investigation on notification. I'm not necessarily looking for more notification because I think we are a small community, and I would worry about stigmatizing families in the community. But I think knowing what other places are doing would be helpful. Councilmember Schutz?
Yeah, I basically agree that on the large buildings that the City Council should be in a position of authorizing the exemptions from rent stabilization, mainly because I can't think of any good reason why we shouldn't be in that position. And this committee from Cheer has made this recommendation after giving it a lot of thought on the whole thing. I think it would help the City Council as council members to be a little bit more connected to the realities of the affordable housing situation in the city how things are going in terms of trends.
Great. Anyone else want to comment on this one? There is a third category. It's for new construction. Do you want council approval on that one? And if you do,
Sure. Yes.
Do you have thoughts on what the review criteria would be? Because right now, because there has to be a reason to deny something. So essentially, with the review of the applications for rent exemption from large rental facilities, there again, the three criteria I went through earlier. For new construction, new housing construction, the way the code is structured now, it's to give the property owner a 5-year window of opportunity to sort of set the rents at the right level based on what market conditions are and what their experiences are. And at that point in time, then rent stabilization kicks in. So do you want to approve applications for exemptions from rent for new construction? And if so, what would your review criteria be? Because that should probably be included in the ordinance so that there's some information in terms of how and why things might be declined.
How frequent
How frequently does that
How frequent? Sorry.
So far, none. But if we're successful in this whole housing push and economic development push, theoretically, you could see more. Not in the next 3 years, but down the road.
So I would go ahead, Councilor Mitchell.
Yeah, I would think that in the case of new construction of what could be affordable housing, I think that the City Council would really want to be involved right from the beginning, because I think that we would be wanting to have that conversation with the developer early on, because any developer's got to understand what their rent rolls can possibly be when they're designing and developing their pro forma cash flows. And it would be a very healthy and wise discussion for us to be a part of, to be able to understand the developer's point of view and what that developer sees as limitations on their ability to produce housing that could eventually fall into rent stabilization. Because if we have a developer come to us and say, well, I would like to be able to do this, but these are some of the unknowns that I'm dealing with, then we're in a position to think about how we can do something that will facilitate the development and in such a way that will benefit the developer, but also increase affordable housing in the city. And I think it could be almost on a case-by-case basis as these projects come along.
There is nothing in the ordinance right now that requires the new housing construction, new rental housing, to be affordable in the rent stabilization. It just governs the rent increases that can be applied or assessed to the tenant at any given point in time.
Councilor Mel?
I was just going to say, based on what you said about not seeing anything in the next 3 years, I would put a higher priority on some of the ideas we have on paper here from Shear, but think about the issue of new housing as a 18 months out kind of thing to try to develop in that timeline, including criteria for not just automatically saying yes, whatever that might look like.
Councilmember Kovar?
Just one question with the new construction. What are they asking for an exemption from if they haven't previously existed and had rents?
So what it's intended to do is to allow a property owner to learn over time what the rents could be charged at a particular apartment. So say, for example, even with the Coalition for Homes, she's advocating that the rent should be lower based on her understanding of the market, whereas the county was indicating that they might want them a little higher than what she is advocating for. So it's kind of a testing out period, or is designed to be a testing out period, if you will, so that at some point in time over the 5-year period of not being limited to the rent increases that the city has in play, they could either drop their rents dramatically without necessarily impacting their ability to increase them the next year if they've added some new amenity or something like that that would warrant the higher rent. So it's kind of a testing ground.
Okay. So maybe I could recommend on this one, it sounds like the sense of council is that on the large buildings, we'd like to explore changing the city code on that, and that we look into the new construction, and if Ms. Daines, you could come back to us with maybe suggestions on criteria and what other municipalities or entities might do in that area.
I'd love to be able to do that, but you guys are unique. There are no other examples.
But maybe we can have further conversation on that one. All right, moving to the second section, which was the landlords who have been granted rent-stable exemptions must continue to file an annual report. Ms. Daines mentioned that this is already done, but Councilmember Mail, did you have something on this that you wanted to? Oh, okay. So does anyone else have any comments on this one? So then moving to number 3, this is when a building is requesting a rent stabilization exemption. It must be clear about any alternative rent limitations that will be put in place and include detailed information, including the definition and calculation of AMI, if applicable, and the number of units affected, current and future rent amounts up to 3 years, specific to the number of bedrooms. So this had a couple of pieces to it. Is this the one you wanted to?
No, I'm good.
Oh, okay. All right. Does anyone have something on number 3?
I have on part of number 3. So I think the key thing on the first part of 3 is as much detail as can be provided. Obviously, if there's some information that literally just can't be provided, I don't think we would, be in a position to insist on that. On B, where you said there may not be enough staff capacity to be able to monitor that, I'm wondering whether it wouldn't be possible to figure out a way, working where they exist at least, and depending on the capacity building, that we can help with whether we could work with the tenant associations to sort of get that information without literally having to...
That would involve you and everyone else at this table to give your neighbor a copy of all of your income documentation to verify that you meet those income limits. Our experience is that tenants tend not even wanting to give that to their property manager because, to paraphrase woman I had with the conversation, it was none of their business. So I don't necessarily see a role for a tenant association to assume that monitoring component on a one-on-one basis with the tenants that are in that building. I don't think it's fair to the tenant association, and I just don't think it would actually happen. We have depended on the agencies that are monitoring these things and to do their job, and when they don't, we hear about it quite quickly, and we'll work with them. The only one that honestly has not done a good job of monitoring is Montgomery County, and that's with the particular building several years ago, but with the building next door. Other than that, that's the only monitoring agency that we've run into some challenges with.
I was going to suggest maybe on this one, if we could respond back to Cheer and the folks who were meeting and put together this list, maybe go back and figure out what the goals were on this one. And so there may be some other ways to meet the objectives, since I very much appreciate the letter that was put together for us, but we don't know some of the reasoning behind it and goals. There. Sorry.
I keep popping here. I keep popping too.
I know. So maybe on that one, when we can go back to Cheer and find out more information. There may be other ways we can meet their goals.
One thing I didn't address in my staff notes that I think is important to note is that when the exemption expires, or if someone is found to be in default of their agreement, they revert back to rent stabilization to the point where we go back to the time that it was initially approved and then apply all of the rent increases that were allowed, and whatever comes out at the back end is what they have to charge for rent at that point in time.
All right, and then the last one is regarding code enforcement.
Can I just back up on this one
Okay,
for a second? So if we were talking about apartments available for rent, as opposed to 3 or 5 years into an existing tenant, could the city have a website that the landlords were required to enter the rent at which it is being advertised at the time it's advertised? And so there's no work per se for the city in the sense that the company has an obligation.
We're exploring that.
And then the service that we're
possibility.
providing to people is that then they have information on the rents and the units available in the city, which would serve the goal of making the information available to people who qualify.
We actually spoke about that as a possibility for a new program last week. So we're looking at how that might be done from a software standpoint, but also as far as staff monitoring and control.
Thanks.
All right, then the last item was on code enforcement.
I guess I have a question about this. I guess this goes under the requested policy changes paragraph. Ms. Daines, and I'm going to ask this question because a resident who is a landlord on the other side of the issue has raised this issue with me, and I think it's worth playing devil's advocate. We talk about the conditions of buildings in our community that are in disrepair. To what extent is there any validity to the argument that the rent stabilization laws in town and their impact on the rent rolls that landlords receive and minimizing those rent rolls has some, maybe not direct, but some type of an impact on disrepair and their ability to maintain properties that they're renting under rent stabilization? What would be your response to that?
It could depend on what side of the table you're sitting on. Some people strongly, property owners tend to strongly advocate that it does limit any motivation for investing in their property. On the other side of the table, there is the argument that we have attempted to address that issue in the code itself by allowing for fair return rent increases, which the way it's structured is designed to ensure fair return rent increases, so that a property owner can continue to receive the same sort of return on that in 2016 that they got back in 1990. There are challenges with that particular law. Frankly, we've had very few people apply for it, and those that have received fairly small amounts of rent increases. Some of them express great dismay at that. It also, the way it's structured, it doesn't take into consideration increased costs of acquiring a property. So if you bought a property and the mortgage was zipped for the property owner prior that you bought it from because they'd owned it for a very long time, and you just paid now new Tacoma Park rents or prices for that, your mortgage costs and the financing costs are not factored into that at all. So there's always room for improvement. And again, whether it limits investment, it depends on what side of the table you're on.
Now, this council has in its priorities indicated affordable housing being a critical issue, and we've created do we call it a revolving fund? Or
Housing reserve.
Housing reserve fund. In your experience in dealing with landlords in town, to what extent do you think there would be some response, I guess a positive response to whether if we were to set aside some of those funds or consider setting them aside to provide an opportunity for landlords to apply for funds to address issues of disrepair?
I'm hoping that recommendations like that will come out of the strategic plan that we've proposed, that it will make some specific recommendations that might provide access to resources for property owners that want to make investments that haven't been able to cover the costs because of the rents that they're charging, and also potentially look at some improvements that might reduce their operating costs, weatherization and things like that. So I'm hopeful that that will be one of the recommendations from that group.
Great. Thank you very much.
And I would just say, if we did that, it would be important to somehow find a way to restrict it to landlords that had behaved responsibly, so that it wasn't just something, and I know you didn't intend it, so there wasn't just something that was an excuse for people to...
Sorry, Councilman, I don't want to cut you off, but I want to just finish up with the letter from Cheer before we get into...
I thought that's what we're talking about in 4 here, requested policy changes.
Right. Okay, I thought you were going into the new idea of providing funding to landlords.
I thought that was part of it.
Well, I actually think that's a sort of separate.
I can wait, that's fine.
Sorry, my fault.
No, it's all right. I guess the question I had is, Councilmember Siemens, I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I want to take this time to thank the members of CHEER and also staff for the amount of work that you've put into this and the recommendations that have come back to us. And I have been in agreement with my colleagues up to this point. I'm concerned, though, with this this particular issue on code enforcement, that we're not really getting to the core problems of, and maybe we haven't come up with alternatives that are really going to help to ensure that we have well-maintained apartments. This is, I think, a step forward with what's been recommended, but it doesn't address kind of the major issues that we've seen in the other buildings, such as the degradation of the infrastructure of the building, and how the city can identify that and require that repairs are either made or that degradation is disclosed thoroughly upon the sale of the property, so that we don't have these building owners allowing the property to run down, taking the rents and not reinvesting in the building, and then purchasers coming in and buying the building without adequate information and not able to make the repairs necessary, and then the city has to step in and take measures to get the building back into shape by either facilitating the transfer of the building to another entity or sinking money into it through pilots or whatever. I would like to see not just what is in here, but I would like to see additional recommendations or suggestions that the council could consider in addressing the core issue.
I guess that was a similar question that I had is, how long have we had the county doing the code, the inspections?
How long?
Yeah.
2003?
Mm-hmm.
I think the issue is that I believe we follow, what is it, the BOCA requirements, but what is being checked is not, there's 2 pieces to it. One is what's being checked and code and violations written for aren't followed up in a timely manner. That's one thing, but the other thing is there are things that need to be checked and we need to see progress in that just aren't being checked.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's where my question was going, is whether or not we should open up and consider having the county continue to do the inspections versus bringing it back to the city.
When I first started here, there were 6 people on the city's code enforcement staff doing primarily rental housing licensing. Mm-hmm. And it was a challenge in terms of the quality of the inspections, the access to the resources that were needed to do it, and all of that. From my personal perspective, I think the county does a great job, and it also allows us the flexibility to bring in more inspectors as we need them, depending upon what buildings are being inspected at that, or due for an inspection at that time, or what the issues are. So, for example, we could end up with a very large code enforcement staff if the primary focus is to do rental housing licensing. A third of them would not be doing would not be as fully engaged in inspections as they might be if they were also assigned to other parts of the county, which is what they have now. The timing that is identified in the Cheers and the Renter Protections Group's comments mirror what we're currently doing now. So the county will issue a notice of violation, give the property owner 30 days to abate or correct that particular violation. And then if they don't, then they issue them a citation. And by state law, there are so many days that they have to respond to that citation. So that in itself can be 45 days just to respond to the citation. If you throw in someone asking for a court date, then it gets even longer. So there's some challenges just from a logistical standpoint in terms of the faster turnaround with the abatement of the code violations. The other issue is this is a property maintenance code standard, and as Councilmember Siemens has indicated, these are basic code violations. They are not electrical inspections. They're not going through and doing an extensive evaluation of the elevator or the HVAC system. It's a very basic code, property maintenance standard. And frankly, an inspector could go through at 5 o'clock on a Friday and at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning, there could be property maintenance violations that appeared overnight for whatever reason. So it's often just a snapshot in time, and again, they're very basic standards that they're inspecting for. The standards they inspect for are not directly BOCA, they're a modification of BOCA to, that the county's had in place for many, many years, but they are standards that are used across the country for rental housing properties. Very similar to what HUD uses now for its public housing properties, things like that.
Councilmember Schutz.
Yeah, the question that I have is the degree to which there's a correlation between housing code violations, persistent housing code violations, and properties that are exempt from rent stabilization versus properties that are under our city's rent stabilization. Is there any correlation there at all?
I don't know. It's a good question. We'd have to do some investigation. Ashley can probably answer this better than I, but most of the organizations that or entities that have long-term financing also factor in an inspection process that they themselves conduct because they've invested money in this property or a property, so they want to make sure that it's maintained. Sure. Yeah.
The reason I ask, of course, is that the elephant in the room is Hampshire Towers, and that was a property that was exempted per city law, and the county, for those who aren't familiar with it, but most of us are, just that the county did the inspection, and the 20-year agreement with Tenacity, who purchased the building, was that they had to make a very long list of physical improvements to the interior and exterior of the building within a certain period of time. Memory serves me, it was like 2.5 years. And what Tenacity did was what certain kinds of landlords, call them slumlords if you want, are capable of doing, particularly when they're sophisticated like Tenacity is to figure out how to lie and cheat to fool the inspectors and cover things up cosmetically. Because I saw this stuff with my own eyes, as did many of us in the work in your department. We were aware of that.
Well, in that particular case, that particular property is different than any other one on the list because that particular property did not receive any financing. So they committed to limiting their rents. The rent increases were tied to improvements, but there was no money being put into the property that would actually finance the improvements. Yeah. So talk about a perfect storm in that particular case.
It was a perfect storm, and I think it's very important for us to understand what distinguished that property from others in the city, because it's hard to talk about exemptions from rent stabilization without sort of saying we can do rent exemption, we can do exemptions, and we're not going to run into the problem that we're not going to find another Hampshire Towers on our hands where it got so bad, and we thought that the county was inspecting it, and the county itself thought that they were inspecting it, but meanwhile the place was just sinking into horrible conditions for a very long time. Because I think we need to be able to give the tenant associations and Cheer and others some assurances that that situation is not going to happen again. We can't speak for the housing, the code enforcement people in Montgomery County, but we can assume that they were conscientious in trying to do the right thing and just try and figure out ways such that we can talk about rent stabilization or exemptions from it without having to worry about, well, does this mean the property that we're exempting is going to go to heck in a handbasket under our noses? Because I don't believe that's the case.
I would agree that Hampshire Towers was the perfect storm, but we've had several imperfect storms in the city that were just as devastating to the tenants.
Ms. Daines, could we go back to the letter from Cheer? It asks that the council begin receiving quarterly reports for all properties with outstanding code violations that are at least 90 days old. Is that feasible, that piece?
That's the question that's been asked. The county's been asked the question of, can we do this, and how many do we have right now? Okay. And that's what we're waiting to hear back from.
Because I think my sense from what the council is saying is that we'd like to get that information, and we probably want to explore other avenues to improve infrastructure inspections, as Councilmember Siemens brought up. So it might be once we get this information back from the county, and then we come back with more information. Yeah. I think for me personally, what's frustrating is hearing from residents similar complaints over and over again, and being able to have some kind of report or look back at something and understand when either complaints were put in, when there were code violations, to be able to work with tenants, both in terms of what is a real, not saying it's not a real issue, but what has become a chronic complaint that is not being addressed versus something we can work with tenants and the tenant associations with.
Just as a piece of information, when you do get inquiries like that and you're interested in knowing what the history has been for that specific building, it's very easy to go into the county's e-data mining website, and you can pull up a history for goes back years as the complaints and the inspection results for that particular property. So on an individual basis, it's very easy if you have a specific address. It's consolidating all of that into a single report that is what we've asked them to do.
Well, thank you. I learned something tonight. I appreciate that. Yeah, Councilmember Mann?
Yeah, so can I just sort of back up a little bit? In the context of the horrible explosion that took the lives in the apartment building in Silver Spring, there were a large number of code violations and complaints associated with that building. Do you remember the approximate number?
I don't. I remember reading it at the time and doing the math as far as the number per unit and all of that. One of the biggest things that it's important to keep in mind is that not all code violations are equal.
Yes, right.
So, for example, if the plate off the light switch is not there, that's a code violation, which may not be the same degree of severity as far as life safety issues as the smoke detectors being out or the heat not being on. So it's really hard to say.
So what I'm getting at is that I don't remember what that number was, but I remember it being really, really big.
It was an impressive number.
And from a policy perspective, what I'd want in the city, one is that those numbers were never getting that big, but two, that if they were getting big, that we would know about it, that there would be a notification process. Or even if the numbers were half that big, or even if the numbers were a quarter that big, because I completely agree with your point about not all code violations are equal. but at some point the volume of them speaks to some other issue. And then in the space of the request we have here, which is one, you could read it as one code violation that's 90 days old triggers action. Between that, like 25% of what those apartments in Silver Spring had accumulated and one that's 90 days old, that's to me a grayer area where, as you said, it's about the important violations. The more important are the more safety, health-related violations versus less. It's a mix of the number and the severity and how long it takes, the chronic pattern over time. If it's, it always takes 120 days. So from a policy perspective, I really want to make sure that, and maybe you could follow up and let us know, that we have a system in place so that we would always know when the number of violations went up to a significant level, and you would always know, obviously. And second, in terms of, again, the number of violations, the sort of average resolution time for those kinds of buildings. And then within the sort of space where there's a smaller number, getting from you sort of finer level information on where we could sort of productively focus our time and attention through more information and where
we can do that. Yeah. One of the things that I should note is that you have two different kinds of rental housing licenses, and the nature of the license depends on the conditions of the property at the time that it was inspected. So if you have a building that has 5 or fewer code violations, regardless of its size, and none of those are life safety, then you get a biennial license, which means you only have to apply and pay a fee every other year. And I'd say roughly half, I think it's about half of the building or the individual buildings that we have licensed are qualified for a biennial license. Many of them are single-family homes, but we can start pulling together more information in terms of the number of violations in a building. What I'd like to do is base it on the number of units. So you have 500 violations, but you have 300 units. Do it that way as opposed to if it kicks over 100.
Yeah, you get what I was thinking about. And then one specific question. The building that Councilmember Schutz is referring to, is that the one listed here under Orlo Tacoma LLC? There's no information, or it looks like there's no information on the units other than the 30 that are 40% AMI. The rest, there's 216 units, but only 30 have a listed AMI rent level.
If I recall correctly, all of the units are at currently at 60% AMI. Those that aren't, there are a variety of different levels.
I don't need to know numbers, but can you just update the table and share that with us when you can? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So I think we're done with this one. Ms. Daines, are you feeling you've gotten enough feedback on this? All right.
I did want to go back to the issue that
Councilmember
Cruz raised before, and I don't know if Councilmember Comer had a comment as well.
I think we're going to get to that, or like the idea of how to use the housing fund. Is that?
No.
No. Okay, go ahead.
So the specific issue that I was interested in is if you look at the table of buildings for which we automatically exempt them from rent control, there are buildings that have a significant, and if I'm reading this right, 40% AMI is a lower income threshold than 80%. So some buildings have a mix of thresholds, but some of them, for example, Parkview Tower has 62 units at 80% AMI and 63 in market. And so I guess the question I'm interested in is, I don't know if that building had stayed under rent control, I don't know what the rents would be at in relation to AMI or market today. And I don't know when we have sort of some more of the single, smaller apartment buildings that Councilmember Cruz was bringing up. In other words, what I'm getting at is whether we're effectively letting people increase rates at a higher rate when they're in these bigger buildings that are getting exemptions than some of our smaller buildings. And so sort of the analysis of what is the rate of rent increases, what is the average rent in sort of comparable units, at least in terms of size, if not in buildings.
We can try to pull that together for you. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the rents that are based on as a percentage of area median income by bedroom size has remained fairly flat, so there haven't been any significant rent increases for those units. But we'll do our best to pull together the information.
Because just what I'm trying to get at is, let's say a small building is at $800 a month rent, and they've been getting 1% increase under our rent control policy for a long time. The rents could be capped at a significantly lower rate than some of the buildings that are listed here.
Oh, they are, yeah.
And as a policy outcome, that doesn't seem like a policy outcome we're intending, is to let large, often nonprofits who have access to federal funding have higher rates than buildings that do not have access to that capital. So understanding that distinction would be important. It could be a couple of examples that we look at, or a broader perspective, but I think that would not be an intended outcome of our policy, so it would be good to understand that.
Okay.
That's relevant.
Yeah, no, it is. I'm sorry.
Peanuts.
I think it's a good thing. All right. Anything else on the letter? No, I think, all right. I just want to thank again Chair for putting all this work in it. We'll go back and make sure, I think none of us were able to quite look at the revised letter that was sent this week, but we'll just go back and make sure there aren't any other outstanding issues, and then we'll bring this back before council. So, all right. The next piece of this was the down payment assistance program.
Yeah, I've asked.
Could I, point of order here is that it's 20 minutes of 10, and I'd like us, and a lot of people in the audience, I'm sure, would like us to be talking about recreation, and I'm asking if we could not continue the agenda item number 3 for a different time, because a lot of people who were here for agenda item number 2 have left, and I'm afraid we're going to lose some more. And we did plan to have a meeting here for this particular reason, as opposed to our regular place.
I would like not to push this to another meeting because we're frankly, I think we're behind on talking about some of these housing issues that we wanted to address. I think if Ms. Daines doesn't mind taking a pause so we can do the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center discussion, we could take a pause here, but I frankly don't want, I mean, I could get a sense from the rest of the council, but I think we have 3 other housing items here that we wouldn't want to push till it'll be January before we have a chance to discuss them.
The proposal would just be to switch the order. So to talk about the rec, this building.
Right, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's what I said, yeah.
We're losing people very quick, and I'd like to do that.
Okay, that's fine.
Can you stick around?
So if we could just have Mr.
We're
Clark.
still doing the housing and after.
Yes. Sorry,
Yeah, that's part-
sorry, Councilman Schutz. When you said put off, I thought you meant put off for another meeting.
I did, but we won't do that. We will do both tonight, and we will.
Mr. Clark, if you'd like to come up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Daines.
I think Sarah's going to take the lead again on
Yes.
this one.
If
Oh,
don't
so you
mind,
get to
I
stay.
can-
So this doesn't matter to you.
Cool. Many of you may recall that in 2011 and 2012, the city and in partnership with Montgomery County undertook a street plan for this area, the Tacoma-Langley Sector Plan. And included within that plan, which provides a variety of recommendations for the redevelopment of the Crossroads area down a little bit into along New Hampshire Avenue, was, and I'm going to get the language on this right, the replacement of the Tacoma Park Recreation Center with an expanded and updated facility independently or as a mixed-use facility. So included in the sector plan, which has been adopted by both Montgomery County and endorsed by the City of Tacoma Park, is this recommendation for this particular site. As a result of that recommendation, staff at the county and the city level have had sort of a sporadic, ongoing conversation that has gone over a period of years about how that recommendation might be followed up on. And as indicated in the cover memo, the county has proposed essentially a land swap, so that in exchange for a narrow, vacant piece of property that's in the Long Branch, I've forgotten the name of it all of a sudden.
The Long Branch Stream Valley Park?
Yes, which is basically an open, unprogrammed space. And there's just this tiny little lot, very narrow, very long, and not terribly developable. In exchange for that property, the county would transfer ownership of this site to the city, and all that entails. The only condition to that land swap would be that the property continue to serve a recreation purpose. And in the event that this property were, that was not a viable option or a feasible option, or there was another option to create a recreation purpose in another place, and the city decided to sell this particular property, the proceeds from that sale or that transaction would have to be invested in a capital investment in another location in this area for that purpose. So basically, if the city and the county were agreeable to swapping out the land, and the city decided that they would make improvements to this facility, that would be great. But if they weren't able to do it, or another location as yet unknown and not already determined were identified that might be more appropriate for a larger facility, and to help finance that, the city wanted to transfer ownership of this to another entity. We could do that, but those resources would have to go into a recreational facility. So that's one issue that the council is being asked to do. If you're interested in pursuing this land swap, there are advantages and disadvantages to it. One, you would have control over the building and the land, and you could do whatever you wanted to at the parking lot. As far as, one of the issues in this particular area is overnight parking. It's very limited. Right now, Montgomery County does not allow overnight parking in any of its recreational facilities or its parks. So you might want to reconsider that policy. The other thing that's important to keep in mind is that if you become an owner of this particular facility, then it's your facility and you have to maintain it, and there are costs associated with its ongoing operation. So there's that question. The other thing that we're asking...
About the question?
Yes.
I didn't notice a map or anything describing what the other piece, I know what this piece of land is, but what the...
We didn't include that, but we can.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
And then also, I would just think that we might want to put restrictions on what they could do with that piece of land, too.
It's true, yes. Yeah, and this is, I'm just talking about this in very broad terms because there has not been any negotiation. It's basically been kicking the ball back and forth about how this could be structured. Is it something that the county is interested in doing? Is it something that the city is interested in doing? And if so, how does that happen?
If I can interrupt, one of the things that's confusing, you've been referring to the county, but we're talking about Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. And they are the ones that own this property. And they want this other piece of land to add to their park land. But in order for a transaction to take place, a swap to take place, it would need both the approval of this body, the council, but also the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. They've not had, as far as I know, any discussion about this. This has all been at the staff level. And so the person that we work with from the staff is very knowledgeable about real estate and what the commission would accept, but it's not gone to that level. want to be clear.
This is all very preliminary. Nothing has been decided. It's basically to get some direction from the council so that we can take the next step knowing that we have your support. The other thing that we're proposing is to sort of do a parallel track, if you will, in terms of investigating what interest there might be for partnership opportunities or redevelopment opportunities for this site and this building. You may recall in the last year or two we issued a request for proposals to do an analysis of what could be done to this facility, which Greg can answer any questions more specifically than I, but also what could be done at the site, given its strange shape, all of the constraints that we have associated with it. So we have a lot of information about what could be possible, but we're hoping to get some information or determine if there's anybody interested in doing it. So we've proposed issuing a call for a letter of interest. Basically, hi, we have this property. We're looking at any and all opportunities for just making improvements to this building and expanding its recreational purposes, to selling it for mixed-use property with the condition that another site is located for a recreational facility in the area. So we're not wanting to come up with any specific recommendations as far as what that project might look like, but we want to see what the options are, and again, if anyone is interested in working with us. We've talked to the county and said, we might be interested in doing this, and they don't see it having a negative impact at all in terms of the proposed land exchange that they've been talking about.
I think the other kinds of things that, obviously, we had the two studies. One was kind of what recreation wants there would be in this area. There's certainly been the Friends Committee, which on their own has had some of the similar discussions. We've talked a little bit about maintenance and what the maintenance has been on this building and what it could be. And I don't know, Mr. Clark, do you want to talk a little bit about what Maryland National Capital Park and Planning has done recently on this building and what they might do?
Well, as far as currently with maintenance, the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission has committed to performing major maintenance items. But recently, they've come in and done things to provide things to the exterior. They take care of landscaping, very small things. However, they've taken care of door jams and things like that when they break and things of that nature. And I have actually an extensive list of things that they've done since 2007 in the facility to include electrical work, not these lights here, but other electrical work throughout the building, plumbing issues, issues within the kitchen, things of that nature. The interesting thing about it is the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission did a 2030 study in which they've identified things that would need to be done to this building up until the year 2039. And since this study was done, they have not performed any of the major maintenance items that was on the list, and they've indicated they are not planning to perform any of those major maintenance items.
The most expensive capital improvement to this building was actually done through the city of Tacoma Park with a grant from the state in upgrading the lighting in this room.
And we can see the evidence.
Right. So I think the issue here is, I think we're getting to a point where we should really seriously consider swapping for the building, whether that's what we want to do or not. So kind of continuing to look at that. But I really did appreciate the idea of seeing what's the interest, what are some brainstorming ideas for either this site, for providing recreation on this site in some format that would be an improvement to what we have now, or some other kind of complementary area where we still provide recreation services to this neighborhood, to this side of the city, in a much better facility. And so all of those are kind of up in the air. I think it's probably time to not just say it's on something to do in the future, but we probably are at the point where we need to make some, find out some information and then maybe make some decisions.
Councilmember Mill?
Yeah, I guess, and does the Maryland Park and Planning Commission, does their budget come from the county?
Well, it comes from a special tax. A portion of the tax goes to the...
Is that the recreation tax that we pay as well?
Yeah.
And their board is appointed...
It's part of the recreation tax.
Their board is appointed by the county council?
I guess it is. I mean, it's by county commission, so it's both Montgomery County and Prince George's County.
And I raised those issues because I don't support us doing this, but I'm fully supportive of, for example, us putting all the pressure we can on the new organization that runs economic development in the county that they created last year to do that same kind of bidding process or request for interest process. And I guess I'm concerned about us letting the county, given the issues of double taxation we have, even further off the hook in providing services. They're supposed to provide recreation services to our residents. They don't. And I don't believe that the budget for this building is $20,000 a year. It would be bigger. And so I'm fully supportive of putting pressure on the county to do that. I think if I were thinking of 3 issues that I would ask every county council member who wants to be county executive or get reelected, if they can be, of what they're going to do, this would be one of those issues. How are you going to deal with recreation needs of our residents in this part of the county? How are you going to deal with this asset that you have? But I would take that approach as opposed to taking the approach of bringing it into the city process. We have a new library, we've got a pool, we've got a number of other major capital and Flower Avenue, Green Street, and the intersection of 410, major infrastructure projects that we're working on. And so I would not push this as a city obligation, but would absolutely pursue it as something that we're trying to get the county to step up and do. And I understand there's a big asymmetry in our interest in providing recreational services to residents that can or do use this facility and the counties. But I think there's also an asymmetry in the ability of the county to structure and manage and recruit applicants for complex deals, like a redevelopment of this site with recreational and other multiple uses.
Well, I appreciate that, and the idea of working with the new director is of interest. I do have a couple, I guess, feelings about the timing of that. I do feel that it makes sense for us to at least, kind of have this request for letters of interest. And that whether that comes from us or whether we can talk Montgomery County into doing that and their Economic Development Authority in doing that. I would like to see at least what that kind of feedback is that comes back.
Could we do it jointly with the Economic Development Organization in the county?
If they're interested, I'd love to do stuff jointly with them. And we did just meet the director not long ago, so he's brand new. I did give him a drive around town and past this facility. Part of the thing, and so I think we should definitely look to see if we can do that. The commitment of Montgomery County to providing recreation services in this area, to me, is weak, and the difficulty of having the 2 different kinds of uses. The way that Montgomery County handles this is that it's the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission that owns this property, but it's Montgomery County Department of Recreation that's supposed to be running the facility and doing the operations, doing the programming. They don't. They are supposed to they're contracting with us to do those recreation services, and they pay us about half of what we spend on providing recreation services. So there's a tendency, because there's 2 agencies involved, of pointing fingers, that it's the other person to take it up, and it doesn't get anywhere. I've been dealing with this facility since unification, and it has been a stepchild. The real improvements have come just recently with the added attention that the Department of Recreation has given it to us from the city. I think it's worthwhile checking in with Montgomery County Economic Development, but I wouldn't want to wait too long to also get some ideas, because I think once we get some good brainstorm ideas on the table, it might help open up the doors a little bit. You have something concrete to say other than you're still ignoring us as a discussion point. So that's I'd prefer to go out for that, but I'd like to, if we could do it jointly, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah. I would just ask Mr. Clark, I sent in this question by email. If I'm reading what we have here on what the maintenance and what work needs to be done, it's almost it's over $500,000, and so you're saying that none of this work has been done that they scheduled. And do we have sort of an estimate on what needs to get done just for us to continue offering rec services here?
Well, essentially, the basic maintenance services are, still taken care of, and if we need something, then they'll come and do it. However, forecasting out, because they have a need to get rid of the facility, I don't believe that they're willing to put any more money into the facility for long term.
But did we have a look at like the roof or any of that?
No, we haven't taken a look at the roof. But however, I've spoken with our Public Works Director, and she's going to work with us to get someone to take a look at the roof as well as the HVAC system to make sure that it'll last with the next 3 to 5 years if we decide to go through with this process.
I think there were some big ticket items like plumbing renovation, electrical renovations were scheduled for 2016, the roof, the HVAC system, and things like that. And I think before we think about just swapping land, and the fact that they haven't put the money into the building to keep up the maintenance is something we need to consider.
Yeah, kind of. I do think that if we identify a particular need for a new roof or something, Park and Planning wants to get rid of this building.
Yes, they do.
And it may be the leverage that they go ahead and put forward that put money towards that work, even if it's not needed right away, but that be something that comes to us to help facilitate the deal. Still don't know that I would recommend it. I have to see what those numbers are, but if we can use it as leverage, I think we should.
Okay. Councilmember Schultz?
The thing about doing a letter of interest is that it doesn't cost us anything in terms of dollars, and it doesn't cost us anything in terms of time. We can do this, and it's kind of like getting some juicy bait on a hook and throwing it into the lake and letting it sit there for a bit and see what, if we get bites and what's on the end of the hook when we reel it in. My hope and thought has been for a long time that we could get a rec center built for us on New Hampshire Avenue, not necessarily at this location, and preferably not at this location, actually, because that way you're never without a rec center. And as part of a larger development where a developer would say, yeah, we'll build you the rec center that you want with all the bells and whistles and activity centers that you want, and in return, we're going to build a certain size mixed-use project, housing and other uses, and it might not be at this site, because my concern is if somebody said, yeah, we'll build you a new rec center here, that means for at least 2 years, maybe longer, there wouldn't be any rec center at all for the city. And a letter of interest will tell us if anybody's curious about that. I know the Willow Fund, who bought the Hampshire Towers, has expressed some definite interest in building on this site something. And so we'll have to see. And if it turns out that there's no fish in the lake, then that tells us gives us a lot of information to guide the city council's strategies here, of whether to adopt Councilmember Mail's approach to things or not. I think, though, and I can't prove it, but I feel that we will get some interesting responses that will stimulate the conversation with the city and with the community about what might be possible, and sort of, as Ms. Ludlow said, sort of open the door to our thinking, because what we heard here tonight, and what we've heard from for the Friends of the Tacoma Park Recreation Center, is that, first of all, they don't want to wait very long, if at all, to get some changes made here in terms of programming and whatever else can be done to squeeze activities out of the space. And that process is not at all incompatible with sending out a letter of interest, because we pretty much know that whatever we do, it's going to take time. So I think it's a good time for us to go forward with that now and just see how it goes, and not try to be too prejudicial at this point as to what we think the outcome will be.
Anyone else? Yeah, Councilman Cole.
Thank you. Thank you. I would love to see the county do what I feel like it's supposed to do, and I just don't have a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of hope or expectation that they will, and I think we're put in an awkward situation. I feel like a lot of times, not in this context, but Democrats are put in a position where instead of just, sticking our heels in the ground on things, we still want to make sure that programs are delivered to people that we care about. And so in this case, I don't want to use the county's, intransigence or fecklessness or whatever it is to just mean we have to wait a long time. And I do appreciate the work that's been done by the new Friends group. And I think seeing what's out there might help jumpstart something. We might find something that we weren't expecting or that we didn't understand would be out there. The one thing I would say, and I understand this is just a brief description in the material here, but I think the emphasis on the recreation piece of it maybe has to be beefed up a little bit, because you could easily, and I know this isn't by any means the actual draft, but you could easily read this and interpret it as long as they just did something like this, that would be sufficient. And I think we need to specify that we're really looking at an expanded recreational center that ideally this new developer is going to build for us. And in the letter, I would say that we should not spell out, the square footage for the ping pong room. Where Mr. Qureshi and I had a little battle recently, but over across town, but mentioned some of the other kinds of things that we would expect would be there, so that they couldn't just say, oh, okay, well, we'll build it somewhere else and we'll just basically build a thing this size. And I've watched basketball games here, and you have to stand with your back against the wall so your kid doesn't crash into you. We need something a little bit better than this. So,
I just want to join my colleagues. I don't think that there's any harm in pursuing the letter of interest, although as it's currently drafted here, it says in a variety of scenarios, including but not limited to. I would like to see what those other scenarios are before the letter goes out. I think proceeding with the letter of interest, which, as Councilmember Schutz says, wouldn't cost us any money, which is right. It will cost us some time, some staff time, but probably minimal. I think it could provide us some direction, and we could approach this in a multi-tiered or multifaceted manner, whereby we also do what Councilmember Mill recommends, which is putting the onus and pressure on park and planning and the county to do what they need to do, and also to see if we can use this funding issue and repair issue for leverage. So that's my position.
Great. All right. Well, I think everyone was weighed in on moving forward with the letter of interest. It sounds like council is in agreement with moving forward on that, and maybe exploring council.
I would just indicate that I oppose doing that, because I just don't think that we're...
Oh, I'm sorry.
we're seriously enough thinking about the consequence of whether we take over the responsibility of the building and the ownership in the future.
Okay.
So I'm voting against, basically because I think it's really important to think through that.
Could we resolve this with a little one-on-one basketball tonight?
I guess my reading of it is that putting out the letter of interest and seeing what we get back could be then used for leverage with the county. So I guess that's how I was reading it. So why don't, since there's some disagreement, why don't we take a hand vote so that we have that for the record? All those in favor of having the staff move forward with a letter of interest, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 to 1, so we can move forward with that.
5 to 1.
5 to 1. I can't count tonight, sorry. Yeah. 5 to 1. And then I think the other question of the land swap, I'll speak for myself personally. I feel like there's still a lot of questions outstanding that before, and we need to talk about it a little bit more. I don't know how my colleagues feel.
Yeah,
I would agree on this.
What?
I don't know where the land is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of questions. The pig in the poke is right, because they haven't made any of the major improvements, and that makes it all the more, for them, more anxious to persuade us to take it off their hands. But at the same time, it's a two-edged sword to the extent that they're desperate to get it taken off our hands, off of their hands. That gives us maybe a little bit more leverage, as was said. But clearly, they played their cards, and that they've made it very well known that they don't want to own this property anymore for whatever reason. Now, whether or not we could ever change their minds on that, we can debate that another time. But right now, we need to learn more about what the deal might be.
Mayor, I mean, I think the whole discussion about the land swap, we're not at that point.
Right.
And so it was just brought up because I think we are going to be at that point relatively soon. There's pressure on it. And so I wanted you to be aware of that, but we didn't provide the information that would be something that you could make a decision on.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. And I think having the information from our Public Works Department about what work needs to be done here is going to be key to that. So thank you very much, Mr. Clark. All right, so let's go back then to the housing conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Clark.
I want to thank the mayor.
Thank you, everyone, for staying. And I apologize for the other housing issue just recently came up, so that was why. And I didn't realize people were traveling from Annapolis. So I appreciate your flexibility. The other housing issue just got put on our agenda because we only had 30 days to kind of respond to that. So I appreciate your flexibility. Thank you.
And I would like to express my gratitude to Mayor Stewart for interrupting the housing thing so we could take care of recreation. And I'll stay in here as long as necessary.
I will not be staying here.
All right, so I think we were up to the down payment assistance program.
I've invited Ashley Johnson-Hare, our new manager of the Housing and Community Services Division, to go over a draft proposal we have for a city-funded down payment assistance program.
Good evening. We are excited to announce that we are in the planning stages of a down payment assistance program for purchase of property, residential property in the city. So I essentially want to walk you guys through some of what we've come up with. It's based on some of our research on best practices of other small municipalities kind of around where we are. We met with the city of Gaithersburg. They already have a down payment assistance program. We're in the process of also meeting with the state in terms of their MMP program and kind of partnering with them on some monies as well. So to start, we all know that there's $50,000 sort of set aside for this purpose in the first iteration of this program. The goal is to assist 5 families at $10,000 or 10 families at $5,000 each. My vote is to give more money for the smaller amount, but just thought I'd put that out there. So in terms of requirements, we are looking to assist first-time home buyers only for the purpose of this program that's termed as someone who hasn't purchased a property within 5 years. Essentially, the home buyer's income may not exceed 80% of the AMI set forth by the county. The home that they purchase must be located in the city proper, and that home must pass a certified home inspection. The home buyer must also be trained through a first-time home buyer program that's approved by us. There's also a principal residence requirement, which means that the person that purchases the home through the program is required to live in the property for at least the affordability period, which we are terming at 5 years, the first 5 years after purchase. We have, through our research, we've come up with 2 pretty concrete payment options. Those include, we can assist folks through a forgivable loan, which means that over the course of 5 years, say 20% of that loan will be forgiven. And so with that, there are no payments, but there is a recapture clause where if someone sells or defaults on their loan, that we should get some money from that transaction. The second option is a lien on the home or a second mortgage, whereby the owner would pay the city every month a small fee. We're saying at under $100. What that does is that sort of regenerates the cash that goes into the program, and it also kind of engages the homeowner in the process. So they're getting something and they're putting something back in. In that case, our finance department will capture the payments, they'll bill. Collections is something that we have not done a whole bunch of research on yet. So that's a place where we have to kind of do more research to figure out what the best practices are around that. In terms of other key requirements, the mortgage should be conventional. The housing costs, what we're saying right now, shouldn't exceed 30% of the buyer's gross income, and that's sort of based on the lender's calculation right now, because we're not loan servicers, so that's a place where we also have to do a little bit more research. We're suggesting that the buyers contribute at least $1,000 of their own money, aside from the earnest money that they probably will invest otherwise. The loan terms should be between 10 and 30 years, and that's essentially how we expect the program to go. The purpose, again, is to kind of create a better movement through the housing continuum in the city. We want people to rent in Tacoma Park and feel like they're getting a bang for their buck, but be able to also buy in Tacoma Park. So that's really the purpose of the program, to create some affordable housing opportunities in the city. So.
We're hoping to get your initial feedback to some of the general parameters that Ashley has outlined as far as, are we on the right track? Should we start over again? Are there aspects of it that you find particularly appealing or are concerned about?
I actually have a question, if I may, Mayor. I know that according to the materials, this sort of mirrors a down payment assistance program at the state or county level. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. What I'm trying to understand is, because I've looked at down payment assistance programs throughout the country, particularly in major metropolitan areas. And here we're talking about Montgomery County's AMI, which I think is the same as DC's, presumably, but I'm not sure. But I noticed that in other jurisdictions, you think of areas with very high property values and expensive and real affordability issues like San Francisco and New York City. And I noticed that the percentage in terms of the income requirements for AMI, we're at 80%. Other jurisdictions will have 100% or 110%. How do you make that determination, and to what extent do we have any data available to us in your department that shows us that, you know, people at that 80% AMI, there is a contingency of residents here who obviously would qualify for that, but would also be interested in such a program? Does that make sense?
So, well, I don't know if I can fully answer the question right now, but what I essentially wanted to do in preparing this was to align our income requirements across the board. So like right now for the CDBG program, we require that those programs assist folks who are at least at 80% AMI. So I just wanted to sort of mirror that so that our programs are aligned in terms of income requirements. So saying that their income doesn't exceed AMI, to me, and from my research, this is the population that most needs the assistance, folks who make under 80%. And it's just because housing costs, the median home cost here is like $475,000 roundabout. So the money is really needed for people who are at that lower spectrum of the income threshold, if that makes any sense. Sarah, did you have something to add? Or?
That is also a group that might be more in the market for a condominium because of the pricing of the single-family houses in Tacoma Park. And condominiums are half the price of a single-family standalone structure based on what I've just observed in the newspaper.
And that was and I appreciate you bringing that up, Ms. Daines, because I think what you've described as a medium home price in Tacoma Park, or single-family home, of being $470,000 to $500,000, $10,000, assuming a family is eligible for that, is what? I don't know, 2% or what is it of the overall value of the home? And I think standard loans require you to put forth, 10 or 15 or 20%. So I'm just concerned about, is this going to, who is this going to help and how much is it going to help? I realize that there's a minimum contribution requirement under the program from the family, but even if you have $10,000 and you couple that with the $1,000 or whatever they have to put in, is it going to move the ball forward as much as we'd like, or is it just going to increase the sale of condominiums, which in the grand scheme of things, I think in terms of our inventory is on the lower end in terms of the percentage of types of housing we have in this city. So I just raised those issues to try to understand how you got where you got. I have done some of my own research on AMI and percentage levels in metropolitan areas that I might send to you for your consideration to see how we sort of roll this out.
Well, if I could just interrupt just for a second. One of the things the mayor and I actually met with a state official, and her impression of Tacoma Park is that we're all wealthy and that we have only expensive homes here. And that's actually not the case. There are a number of smaller homes in some neighborhoods that are affordable, are more in the affordable range. So, I think that that's one of the things to keep in mind, that, we're not going to get somebody into a pretty big home. We're going to be looking at something that's a smaller property or a more modest home. And so that's, and probably they're going to be getting some other assistance for some other kinds of package deal. So it's, I think it's a really important question to ask, who are we helping and what kind of opportunities do we have? But I think we do have some opportunities, and we haven't been offering any help. So we're trying to take a first stab at it.
And frankly, we're hoping that this will leverage additional resources as far as down payment assistance. The mayor, I believe, and Suzanne had referenced a site visit to Salisbury? Mm-hmm. Yeah, where they had brought in, where the people that were selling houses actually contributed to some of the down payment support. And there are other resources that we're exploring at the state level as well.
And the reason I bring this up, and this is sort of the research, and I'll stop right here, is that, the AMI analysis or index has been something that's been used over decades. But the research that I've been seeing in major metropolitan areas, the generation of people who are first-time home buyers now, and there's a movement towards income to debt ratio analyses in lieu of this based on income, because my generation of people who are buying homes today come into it with probably well-paying jobs but substantial educational debt. And I think the educational debt is a huge prohibition on, and this doesn't cover everybody, because there are low-income people who just cannot afford homes. But that's another population of first-time home buyers that are inhibited from doing so because educational debt precludes them to, have the requisite savings or whatever it is that you need to have down payment. But then the income levels under an AMI calculation also preclude them because they might make a little bit more than that's necessary. So that's why I just kind of find this whole issue interesting. So that's why I raised that.
I guess from my personal perspective, I think it's important to establish some sort of income ceiling. Otherwise, our $50,000 will be gone in about 5 minutes.
Yeah. Councilmember Mann?
Yeah. Did you say the county also has a similar program, or the state?
The city of Gaithersburg has a similar program, and we met with them because of their size, and that they also are working with the state on the MMP program.
And there is the county is exploring a similar program with the state, but they're exploring.
Got it. Okay. A request for information. Could we ask I think it's the county agency that tracks property sales for just a list of records of the number of, basically I'm looking for the histogram of how many houses under $300,000 sold in the last 10 years or something like that. So we know sort of what the spread of home sale values have been.
I believe we can get that.
I mean, it's online. You can look.
That would be something that we could get through the strategic plan.
Yeah, they know all this.
There we go. That would help inform, are we actually providing valuable assistance? That's my first question. The second question is whether, I don't understand the language on page 2 in terms of forgivable loan and second mortgage. In that, I thought when we approved this, we were talking about basically giving people a grant of $5,000 or $10,000 as opposed to making them pay it back. Were we not talking about just giving people money?
Because it's such a small pocket of money, I thought it was important for the council to visit the opportunity to have the fund sort of regenerate over time. And so that's why I added that provision there. The city of Gaithersburg has been successful in implementing the second option, and they had not always had that in place, maybe for a year and a half or so. And so I thought it was important to include that for your information as a possibility.
So let me put the two ideas together then. I propose that we have a 60% AMI, and if you're at 60% AMI or lower, then it's a $10,000 or $5,000, whatever the number is, grant. You don't have to pay it back. And I say that in reference to the fact that my AMI, my income, 2 years ago would have made me eligible for this if my family of 4, and I can't imagine that I'm the target population.
Definitely not.
You're pretty sure that I'm not. Thank you, Councilmember Schultz.
But it would be very possible, and it's not uncommon, I believe, to have a different repayment, if you will, structure based on different categories within the eligibility.
Because I would just think if it's, if you're at 60% MI or 40% or, whatever you think is a better, not 40, 50, 60, $10,000 in your pocket that you don't have to pay back is a much bigger thing than a no interest loan. And then we'd be able to explore, how is the program working, and you'd have sort of one universe of applicants who are have a lower income level, but to whom we're giving still modest but a clearer benefit, and then the second tier, and we'd figure out, well, who are we helping with the program, and after 2 or 3 years, we could say, okay, this is how it's worked out. This one hasn't been used at all. This one's been used completely, or we're using both, and everyone's happy. If we could, that would be. And I guess the one other comment that I would raise is associated with the second mortgage description. I just want us to be really cautious about creating a program that creates a lot of checks coming in, receivable accounts, complications in terms of administration for you all, in terms of keeping track of payments that could be difficult. So,
honestly, we talked to the finance director because it was an option that Ashley had proposed, and I went in there fully anticipating her to tell me no. But because of the new Tyler system that we have in place, there is that functionality that we haven't had in the past. They are not going to collect if somebody doesn't pay, but they have the capability of processing routine monthly payments without a significant challenge on a staffing level.
Yeah.
Councilmember Schultz, yeah.
One thing to keep in mind is that this program will only function and be available to anybody who is first able to find themselves eligible to get a first mortgage from a lender, from a mortgage company or a bank. And so I would think that when you get down to the 60% AMI and the 40% AMI, even people with really good credit may not just simply qualify for a mortgage from any lender. It's not like the good old days when they were doing no-doc loans and lending money to everybody. Being facetious when I say the good old days. So that if we go too far down on the AMI ladder, we just may find that it's an empty set of applicants who would like to own a home, but they just don't have enough income to even pay the first mortgage, much less go any further than that. But I'm interested in the chance to look at various alternatives that may vary a little bit. I do know that once you've made a loan, it does get recorded, and it becomes a lien, and then if it's not paid, then you have to make a decision with regard to collecting it, and how much work do we want to put our finance department through with regard to trying to get people who do not pay their loan, even if it's $100 a month. It's not a criticism, it's just a possibility, because we don't want to be, we're not in a position to sort of say, oh, we're going to foreclose on the house, because the first lender won't tolerate, the first lien lender won't tolerate that. So we really don't, we'd be pretty toothless when it comes to collecting on a loan where, for whatever reason, a borrower can't or won't pay that loan. Just something to think about. Not trying to narrow it down and say, don't do this. I'd rather us to keep trying looking at all different possibilities.
And I'll say, I like, Ashley, as you said, doing potentially the 5 families at 10,000 and starting with that to see how that works. And I would, and I think adding what Councilmember Mail said about maybe the 60% AMI, and we don't do the loan to see what applicants we get in it. I would say that I would be really interested in moving this forward. Since we put the Housing Reserve Fund in our budget this year, I would like to see us move something forward, even if we're looking at this as a pilot project, and then seeing how it goes. And also, as I think, as Councilmember Schutz was saying, even to see like who's going to start applying for this. And I have to say that I've had 2 people just in the last month alone, talk to me about what DC does, and that they have this program, and that they were looking into Tacoma, DC, specifically because of this program. And I said, oh, can you wait? Think about a couple of months. Maybe we'll have something here. But 2 different people.
What I'm hopeful we can do is roll this out after the first of the year, as far as putting together a marketing plan and all of the different paperwork that's involved with it.
Councilmember Siemens.
Have we been successful in reaching out to other potential sources of money to leverage this into a bigger fund?
We haven't gotten to that point yet. We've been focusing our energies on trying to work something out with the state, because they have resources already budgeted for that. The next step will be going through and looking at other options to supplement the 10,000.
And again, if we've had conversations that the city manager and I have brought up here in meetings, that if the county does go through with its plan with the state, that could also be counted with this, but they're still working that out. And I would like to explore the idea of what they do in Salisbury, which is with the real estate agents, also putting in additional funds. So in Salisbury, the realtors actually also then contribute some money if they're the people selling the home.
Right. I just was wondering whether we were getting the cart before the horse and doing this piece before we had identified some other partners.
Excuse me. Just a few observations. I'm inclined to agree with Councilmember Schutz that the 60% might just price us out of this a little bit too much, and I'm not against families like the males moving in. I think that if you got, say, an FHA loan where the down payment is really low, could this be combined with that to even lower it further? Because I'm just sort of thinking if the median income or the median house price is in the mid-4s, that means there are half of the houses selling below that. And, you know, if you were making $80,000 and, you know, 30% of that is $24,000 and you sent that out over 20 or 30 years, at modest interest rates, you could afford a house like that. If it goes much lower, I'm just afraid we're going to get down into houses where there just aren't going to be that many, even here in Tacoma Park. But I'd be willing to have 10,000 instead of 5,000 to really make the difference. I think on the affordable, on the forgivable loan, and we had some programs like that in the federal government, the main reason is just you don't want someone to take advantage of this and then just sell it 2 years later. I think the second mortgage thing, I agree with whoever said that, is too complicated, but the forgivable loan that just basically requires someone to stay there 5 years to benefit from what amounts to a grant, I think makes a lot of sense. So I would be supportive of that.
Thank you.
And I think we should try to move forward. I could see doubling the amount and making it 10,000. I'd be happy with that. Doubling the 50,000 to 100,000, and so we can help 10 people, because otherwise I think the number of people we're helping is maybe too small.
So, Councilman.
One suggestion might be if you could maybe create 4 more or less real-life examples of, say, a particular property that we know was recently sold in the city for $350,000, let's say, and that you have a person who's able to come and get a VA loan, and their down payment is going to be X, and just sort of, you know, show what the numbers might work out, so that we could actually, I mean, it'd be semi-real life, but I mean, but to be based on the property that's sold in the last year within the city of Tacoma Park. I think it would help us all get a picture of how effective this program could be. And I do think we should go forward.
Well, I guess that was what I wanted to, given where we are before we go to our December recess, and if the Housing Department would actually like to roll this out in January, I guess my preference would be we've given some feedback and direction, and I would prefer not micromanaging this project. And I think you're on the right track here. We'd like some more information back, but from my perspective, I think we should go forward with this. So if other people feel that way, and we can take a hand vote on that, and then we can do that. So how people feel like this is going in the right direction, we've raised a couple of questions we'd like some feedback on, but the Housing Department should move forward with putting this in place.
Just with the amendment of having a 60% AMI in the grant.
Yeah, we could do that with the 60% AMI as a grant. All right.
I'm not sure what we're saying.
So I think what he's saying is if you're at the 60% AMI, it would just be a grant, whereas everybody else would fall under
forgivable stays just a new category. Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with that as well.
You're fine with that? All right. So I think we
should discourage the second mortgage, though.
Absolutely.
I think that's going to be too complicated for us to do.
Okay.
I raise my hand.
Good. All right. Tiny houses.
You can go home and look at
No.
Yes.
Well, that's right, yeah. Tiny house, okay.
I just have a list of her.
Yeah, we're going to go
What's our next agenda item?
Tiny houses.
Tiny houses.
Oh, I thought that meant tinny.
Made it from ticky-tacky.
Yeah, ticky-tacky. No, I love tiny houses. Basically, there are 2 items left, and they should be fairly short and sweet.
Oh, actually, can I just say thank you to Ashley as you're going home? I very much appreciate your work on this. Thank you.
Councilmember Mail had expressed some interest in learning, getting more information about tiny houses, and are they in fact possible in Montgomery County? What we have included in the agenda packet is a memo from our planning intern, Jamie Ernst, who's done some research both on the requirements as far as the zoning ordinance as well as the building code. And the basic answer is yes. If you accept this definition of a tiny house as something that's 500 square feet or less, and it doesn't pass or go under the threshold for a shed, which is basically 150 square feet, somewhere in there it would fall into a legal tiny house on a city lot. So you can construct them. They can't basically be on wheels, and they have to be fully plumbed, and you have to have the square footage would be governed by the number of people that are actually occupying this space. But as an option for an affordable house or form of housing, it is viable. You can only have one on a lot at a. You can't have a cluster of tiny houses. Many of you may have gone to the Boneyard that was up in D.C., where they had 4 of them, I believe. You would not be able to do that in Montgomery County, but you could construct a single 500 square feet house that Fred would love to live in on a city lot in Tacoma Park on an R60 lot. Okay. So one of the things that I'm hoping will come out of the strategic plan is looking at different ways of providing housing for a variety of different incomes and different housing styles, that the tiny house thing might be one of the recommendations and things that the city could do to help facilitate that. So, for example, I would love to live in a tiny house, as long as I didn't have anybody else in there with me. And what I've seen are packages where you can get what I think would be a reasonable sized, attractive tiny house kit, if you will, for $12,000 to $18,000, which isn't bad. So it's an option and that should be considered in the whole spectrum of housing options available.
So the sort of specific opportunity here is because of a resident's interest. I started reaching out to the county council because I think Ms. Daines had indicated that this would take a zoning text amendment or a new overlay. And it took me a while to get a response, but once I got a response, there was enthusiasm in the sense that the council member, Hans Riemer, who replied, immediately CC'd Councilmember Leventhal and Councilmember Florine, and I can't remember if one other one was on, said, we're all interested in this. If Tacoma Park were to give us an example of what you would want to see in a zoning text overlay, we will have we'll go through our process, we'll sort of jump in on this. Okay. So the reaction was very strong and very positive and enthusiastic, and what they were asking for is there a person on the city staff who could coordinate this and talk to county people about it and get a proposal moving? It doesn't mean that the proposal is going to pass, but they wanted that.
Based on the conversations we've had with the county's planning and zoning staff, you would not need an overlay.
But I think that a couple of the things you said are concerns, in that most people who want to do tiny houses want to be able to, for example, put the tiny house on a lot that has an existing single-family home. Right. There's not a lot of undeveloped lots at Tacoma Park, or they want to have it on wheels. I don't know why, but they do. Yeah. So it would be to try to deal with some of those issues, as well as.
So the primary thing that could be addressed by that would be the secondary dwelling on a single lot. Mm-hmm. The whole wheel thing is a building code issue and not a zoning issue. So that's a whole different thing.
So I want to tee that up for them, right? We don't have to resolve it.
Yeah.
We don't have to solve the problem ourselves. We can't. We don't have the building code.
At this point in time, I have no staff to dedicate to that. We are searching for staff. But we can add that to the work plan for the upcoming year. But
if I can just probe this a little bit more, for an overlay, the idea would be then that in a certain general area you could have a second structure on a second home on a single family lot. Would there be, I mean, I think it'll be really interesting to see if, given the definition of the tiny house, kind of as the 500 square foot maximum, you know, it may actually make more sense just to redefine what R60 is, that just allows it. I mean, as opposed to having it as an overlay zone.
Yeah.
You didn't hear that?
The acoustics in this room are
very weird. I know.
So if you're looking in a different direction,
I've been having a really hard time
I can't
some
hear
of the folks over
what's
here.
going on.
Yeah, so would it make sense then to simply change the definition of R60 to allow an additional tiny house on a single family lot with a...
I mean, I think there would be a variety of ways you could look at it. You could have some criteria based on the size of the lot itself and how much of the lot is covered. And I mean, there would be different ways to do it. I think that would be potentially more appropriate than an overlay zone because that sort of treats everything equally, and it may not be. But we can investigate different options.
So if we could find someone that wasn't on your staff to draft what an amended R60 would look like, could we work with the city attorney to try to get a proposal to the point at which it could go, at least go to county staff?
We could do something like that, but it would not be within the next 6 months.
We'll see if we can make a request through Park and Planning, because I think they should be able to jump on this.
I mean, they're very keen on doing more for...
Yeah, I would, you know, I'm happy to leverage my conversation I actually had today with Gwen Wright to see if we could get somebody assigned to it. She may be very amenable to it.
Yeah, I mean, if we could, because I mean, based on the level of enthusiasm that I got from the county council folks, it sounds like something they will run with if we can help them get it started.
Okay.
I think that makes
and honestly, I think internally we'll face, like, I assume we'd want to do it outside the historic district. It wouldn't necessarily be everything to take place. So I think it's just, the first part is just getting the idea together to then have something that is actually...
I mean, I think Park and Planning folks would know those criteria right up front.
Great.
Yeah, and Portland, for example, has a really aggressive tiny house movement, if you will. So there are lots of ways of caging things that people have already developed.
Yeah, clearly the rules that they list here aren't sufficient because they can be interpreted many different ways as far as when you get down to just the design of the tiny houses internally is different from distinct separate rooms that they identify measurements in here. So I think we need to have something.
Okay, that's a good thing to check.
Yeah.
Last item.
And then last but not least included on the list is the Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan. Draft has been forwarded to everyone earlier this week. And as Suzanne had mentioned in her comments when she, in her email, based on the work that we're doing to prepare requests for proposals for two distinct strategic plans, one for housing, the other for economic development, it became increasingly obvious to us that there was such an overlap in terms of goals, process, information that needed to be gathered, and that we were are proposing, combining the two into a single strategic plan because the housing has an impact on economic development impacts housing options, etc. So if you have any feedback on the draft that was circulated, that would be wonderful. I'm hopeful that we can post it this week and be able to get responses back from folks so that you can take formal action on that in January. One of the things that I have done since the draft went out is to make it clear that we have an expectation in terms of a fairly quick turnaround time on this. It was included in the text, but now it's more specifically identified at the various stages of what we're looking at, so that we're clear that we're anticipating the data collection and analysis to be 1 to 2 months, the process of going through the SWOT and identifying the shared vision as far as the council's and the community's housing and economic development goals would take 1 or 2 months, and then the actual development of the strategic plan also 1 to 2 months. Ideally, it should not take more than 5 or 6 months altogether.
One of the things that we're pleased is that we have a lot of the background information, but it's not necessarily, it takes somebody's eyes that would plan on using it to know which things are appropriate for gatherings. We have tons of information, so somebody doesn't have to go out and do the actual research on that, but it's more assembling what's appropriate for whichever aspect and strategic recommendation is needed.
Any comments?
Please get back to me, and I had a meeting with Councilmember Schutz earlier today. I've got a couple other questions I want to check with a couple of you about, but I think I appreciated the comments, and I'll see if we can pull together here. Okay.
Yeah, since I had that conversation today, I'm not going to make any comments this evening because you're aware of what the ideas that I suggested, and I think we reached a sense of togetherness on that.
Yeah, and I would just say that, and I sent an email to the city manager as well, that my theme tonight is I want to get stuff done and do it. And I would just say, in terms of because of the way our budget works and the planning for our budget, if we move forward with this and somebody that we get on board is identifying things, if there's something that just pops for them and says, like, you should be doing this, I'd hate to wait until June or July to get that information. So I think if there's some way to also have the consultant be thinking about, when we put together our budget, and being able to plan, because getting information, by June or July with all these great ideas, and then we're like, we just finished our budget.
Right.
So,
and a lot of the recommendations might very well be policy recommendations, because the question earlier from Councilmember Qureshi regarding rent stabilization and its impact on the condition of properties. Same thing could be said of the personal inventory tax on businesses. So it may not always be a dollar associated with it.
One of the things that we had a great discussion on this morning was how we can most effectively and efficiently get the community involved in the discussion about what economic development means to the city and to them, what we're thinking about, and just because we all need to raise people's consciousness about it and their understanding of what economic development means in Tacoma Park as opposed to anywhere else in the United States. I think we had a really good discussion about how to do that. That isn't going to take a really long time, and will hopefully excite and energize people to think about the future of our city in that new light, which is an exciting thought.
Yeah, Councilmember.
Sorry, my voice is so bad today. I think it's essential to have a long-term plan on something like this, but I have to say I'm reluctant to have us just wait and spend money, say, potentially only on the down payment program, assistance program, if that's what we're saying now, and I would prefer to while that's being worked on, to put in motion a few other things kind of on the same type of pilot basis. And I'm not going to go into other ideas right now since it's late. We've been here a long time, but I personally wouldn't like us just to say, okay, we're going to do that plan, and then at the end of that process, we'll see how we're going to use the rest of the money. I'm sort of assuming or imagining, supporting the idea of anyway, that we'll continue to put money into affordable housing on an ongoing basis in our budgets, and as opposed to this being a one-time thing. And I think we ought to have some other things also going along on a pilot basis, even as we're doing that. And I don't know whether others agree with that or not, but I think for me it's a mistake to have approved this money and basically end up waiting a year to spend it, other than the $150,000 that we might be talking about.
We do have a number of things that are ongoing, that we want to do during this time period. We're not just going to put everything on hold while we do a plan, but I can go into some of those and talk with you about that.
And it might be the type of...
with economic development, we've got opportunity to do a lot of outreach to individual businesses in the meantime, and a number of activities. So I think, as you said, we do want to not just wait till an end time and then get started.
I guess I would say, the down payment assistance plan or program, and I liked what that looked like mostly, as I said, that benefits lower income purchasers. I think there are other categories of people, including renters, and it includes the rent repair thing that Councilmember Qureshi mentioned, and also that I've talked about, the idea that I've talked about before of helping longer term residents with accessory apartments, renting those to at an affordable rate for lower income people, et cetera, well below the income level of the people that we're trying to help with the down payment assistance. I think we ought to try to have some things to benefit all those groups as opposed to just low to moderate income home purchasers, as much as I think that's a really valuable thing. So I think that's my concern, that we're only sort of hitting one thing right now.
And I just say, I share Councilmember Kovar's point on this, and it might be that if we can get the down payment assistant program up and running as you hope to in January, that there may be some other pilot projects to look at. One of the areas that I'm very interested in is, particularly looking to see if there is a need in helping people who are at the very lower end of the spectrum with any type of a subsidy program or something like that. So, once we get the down payment project up and running in January, as this other thing's going on, maybe we could just revisit other pilot projects that might be doable.
For individuals of higher incomes? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, lower incomes. The very low, sorry.
Yeah.
Can I ask in that context, if we did, for example, and I know we haven't discussed it in detail at all, but could we give tax incentives to homeowners to rent out accessory apartments and have the cost of that tax incentive be taken from a portion of the $400,000 that we've said? That's a budget question. I don't have to answer it now, but that's something I'd like to find out.
Yeah, but it's those types of things that maybe we can explore again after the loan down payment gets up and running.
Just as an aside with the accessory apartment, the number and location of accessory apartments that can be established in Tacoma Park is regulated by the zoning ordinance. So it's not just a matter of establishing an accessory apartment in your house. It has to be so many feet from the next one, and all these issues. So it's more than just a financial incentive, though that would be helpful.
Right, but if existing ones that are already there, if those people would say, okay, when my tenant leaves, I'll rent to a lower income person, and maybe we help them out. That's kind of what I'm wondering.
All right. Anything else this evening? No. Thank you again to the city staff for setting up the location here, and everyone have a happy Thanksgiving next week.